যদি সবাই ফিরে যায়, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায়, যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায়, তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। যদি আলো না ধরে, ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে, যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে, তবে বজ্রা নলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা চলো রে, যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে, তবে একলা চলো রে। একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো, একলা চলো রে।
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. So, after many days, we are back to discussing this book by Max Weber, whom we have named, declared to be RSS Kadalla in our live streams, because his first chapter, then was there an introduction or some sort of a preface, which was also very much RSS-like in the sense that it was very appreciative of India and Hinduism in the exact same ways that the Indian right-wing talks of India and Hinduism. But then later he probably made some criticisms, not exactly those sorts of criticisms that are usually made by the West, but he had some critiques, almost constructive criticisms, I think, which were again criticized by Romila Thapar, of all people, on which we have also done a live stream. She is a very anti-Max Weber-y person. Today we start the second chapter. The first chapter had that much depth that it took 5 live streams just to discuss the first chapter. That is what truly reading should mean, shouldn't it? Going through it in depth, discussing, contemplating, thinking, and even discussing with a huge audience here. It's not huge really, but having sort of a group studies situation, that really helps. So thanks for joining. Name of the book. Oh, you are first time listening to this live stream, Neon. This is the 6th episode, 6th time we are doing this, okay? Check out the entire playlist. The playlist is called Max Weber, The Religion of India. That is the name of the book as well, okay? The Religion of India. Retrowave. Canor uttor ami dite parbo na, but yes. Reparations must be paid if we have change in authority. Reparations for PTSD, yeah. So the first chapter was called India and Hinduism, a basic sort of a primer. We had many fascinating sentences, quotes that we found, because of which Max Weber can be declared to be RSS Kadalla. And we learned many interesting arguments as well. And I think I at least understood caste a little better because of the first chapter. The arguments which may or may not be used, or I think both can and cannot be used in favor of anything and everything. It was that broad, but I think I learned a lot of new things. I especially like the pointing out of how you or let's say how Brahmins would make ritual explanations of pragmatic things, but then also had ritual backdoors to justify a move away from that if that didn't really work out in society. It was that flexible. We actually saying, well, I'm sort of fat, so there is a huge audience, lol. We do not endorse fat shaming at all. Oh, and you're not really shaming fat people. You are, I think, a proud fat person. So yes, we endorse fat prouding. So it's great that you are taking up the space of 5 people, VXT. You know, saying, no, I have seen previous streams, forgot the name. Acha. Going to add it to my cart for the New Year's. Buying a bunch of books since 2025. List of books is almost finished. Nice, nice, great. So today's chapter 2, is called the main grouping of the castes. Let's see. Modern social science long considered the four castes of classical learning to be mere literary constructions. This view is no longer maintained, and our preceding discussions showed its assumptions to be far too sweeping. Even today, the usual classification of castes under the four old classes determines the stereotyped greeting of the Brahman. No wonder that present day castes strive to be classified in terms of the Brahmins, which has been altered, of course, completely revamped because of endless caste based politics and reservations, freebies, etc. Now the incentive structures have completely flipped, and people want to identify as lower castes. The significance of just today, I saw a clip on Twitter, horrifying, insane. What words can you use for things like this? Where was it? It was probably in Bihar only. An OBC shopkeeper in some tourist spot. Okay, it's in the hills. There are steps to the hills. The guy is chilling in his shop. He ends up saying Jai Shri Ram for something. 7 to 8 pretty well off looking, pretty well connected looking tourists. Okay, you can make out that they were well off and rich, etc. Well connected because of the way he spoke. I'll get to that later. So tourists verbally attack him, saying, "क्या जय श्री राम जय भीम बोलो, तुम तो ओबीसी हो, I guess." So he says, "Why will I say jai bhim?" All of the tourists lose their collective minds. They start getting aggressive on the guy further. The shop was in a secluded place, so there weren't other shops in the near surrounding area, so those tourists could get away with it. He was a lone guy fighting this discourse battle, and another woman was filming the situation. So all of them gang up on him and start saying, "No, what's your problem with Bhim? What's your problem with Bhim? Say Jai Bhim. You'll have to say Jai Bhim." The guy goes on calmly saying, "Why will I say Jai Bhim? Why? What's the point?" He has no clue what's going on. Then the main guy who brought it up loses his mind even more. By the way he spoke and the way he dressed up, you could tell he's one of those boomer babu guys who are forever well connected, forever are doing some harm to the country. So he says, "I'll right now file an SC/ST case against you if you don't say Jai Bhim." And he threatens, says, "मैं तुझे ठोक दूंगा, देखता हूं तू क्या उखाड़ लेगा, जिसको बुलाना है बुला, तू जानता नहीं मैं कौन हूं." All of those classic sentences. Okay. Then he says, "तू जानता है मैं कौन हूं." All of the सब box tick किया of elitism, of casteism, जो कि अलग कास्ट बोलते थे किसी और कास्ट को. आज चुतिया ऐसा सिचुएशन बन गया है कि ओबीसी को उनसे लोअर कास्ट आके बोल रहे हैं कि SC/ST एक्ट डाल दूंगा तेरे पे अगर तूने जय भीम हमारा स्लोगन नहीं बोला. एक पॉलिटिकल स्लोगन नहीं बोलेगा तो तेरे ऊपर केस लगेगा, एंड यू ऑल नो बेल वेल कुछ नहीं मिलेगा. तो then after saying all this, the guy takes up a stick and attacks the shopkeeper. जय भीम बोल नहीं तो डंडा मारूंगा बोल के डंडा मारना शुरू कर देता है. The guy still hadn't lost his temper, probably because the guy first picks up a stick defending himself. The stick is taken away from his hand and is hit on him only. Okay, then he's surrounded by these guys. He's trying to defend himself with a short tiny stick. ठीक है, actually अगर किसको मारा जाए तो उसका होगा भी नहीं कुछ, मगर मतलब ज्यादा हार्म नहीं होगा, मतलब मगर चाबुक की तरह पीटा जा सकता है. उस तरह से ही वो आदमी उसको मारना शुरू करता है. ये ट्विटर पे है, मेरे वॉल पे मैंने शेयर भी किया है. तो then he is not losing his temper and stuff because obviously he knows he's surrounded by these people and they are rich, well connected people, and so he is thinking of what the consequences of this altercation might be. Then it ends when it's escalating further. The video ends conveniently because the lady also remembers that, oh my god, we might end up in trouble, so let's not record anymore. What's the book in question? The book is The Religion of India. Okay. No wonder that present day castes strive to be classified in terms of the Brahmins. The significance of the four ancient castes is confirmed by the inscriptions on monuments which frequently refer to them. Of course, it is important to remember that the authors of the inscriptions were quite as much under the spell of the literary tradition as the modern representatives of a caste claiming Kshatriya or Vaishya rank. But the very nature of the phenomena we are dealing with confirms the assumption that the statements in the law books refer to a serious, be it ever so stereotyped, a serious picture of historical social reality and are not simply constructions out of nothing. The two lower so-called castes of the law books were perhaps never cast. Acha, in this last sentence that we just read, might piss off a lot of right wingers because they'll say no, all this happened after the British took over. But some castes existed, ranks existed, but were the same family hierarchies going on existing in that same exact rank, social rank, forever and after? That is the question, and that definitely solidified after the British. But before that, some people had some ways, and actually ritual backdoor ways of getting out of it. The two lower so called castes of the law books were perhaps never castes at all in the present day sense of the term, but even in classical times were rank classes of castes. Originally, they were simply status groups. Yeah, Sudeep, this is the second chapter. An occasional passage of the literary literature observes the Vaishya and Shudra were there before the Brahmins and Kshatriyas ever existed. The Vaishyas were the ancient freemen who were surpassed by the noble sibs being war nobles, hence chieftains, and later knightly gentes and partially also priestly nobles, as found elsewhere. The status inferiors of the freemen were Hilits or Shudras. The symbolic combat between an Arya and a Shudra, a phase of the Gravamayana festival, is comparable to similar significant ceremonies in Sparta. This is Bihar. In fact, this opposition is much sharper than the one between both upper castes and the Vaishyas. The Brahmins and Kshatriyas engaged in certain prescribed exclusive activities which implemented their styles of life as status groups. For the Brahmins, sacrifice, study of the Vedas, receipt of gifts, particularly land grants, and asceticism. For the Kshatriyas, political rule, knightly feats of valor. The occupations of a Vaishya tillage, the occupations of a Vaishya, which is tillage and trade, and particularly the lending of money at interest, were considered by both upper castes as unbecoming to their rank and station. However, in time of need, when it proved impossible to earn one's living conventionally, it was temporarily permissible, with some reservations, to take up the occupations of a Vaishya. Do you remember the paper we discussed by Dr. Shumit Guha on the Jajmani system of Maharashtra? Phenomenal work. He says कि हर बात पे ये लुई डूमो जैसे लोग बोलते फिरते हैं कि सब तो रिलीजियस बुक्स के बेसिस पे ही इंडिया चलता है. तो ये जजमानी सिस्टम जब आ रहा था तब दो वेरी वियर्ड नॉन रिलीजियस थिंग्स हुए. एक है कि जब ब्रिटिश गवर्नमेंट जा चुका है, पैसा सूख रहा है, पॉवर्टी इज इंक्रीजिंग, सबसे पहले किसका नौकरी जाता है? विलेज पुरोहित का, हर विलेज में. ये कैसे हो रहा है? सुमित गुहा खुद लिख रहा है कि अच्छा इतना रिलीजन इंपॉर्टेंट है सबके लिए, तो ये सबसे पहले उसका नौकरी कैसे चला गया? भाई पैसा नहीं है, पूजा मत करो, जागो, भागो, हम क्या करें? देन ही ऑल्सो पॉइंट्स आउट के when people from upper castes, even mostly Brahmins, were getting into business management occupations, A lot of them have reservations themselves. A lot of them are touchy and iffy about it. So scholars create new shastras and create ritual backdoors for them, which justifies their occupation change, and in fact say that and they then try to associate it with Vedas, and say, in fact, declare that, yeah, we are trying to associate it with the Vedas, just so that our point is taken more seriously. So, and then says, nothing is visible without any light, right? So Vedas is the light that we are using to make this point visible, that hey, you all can get into an occupation where you just keep tabs of a business. It's not a problem if you're a Brahmin. Upinder Singh also says that Vaishyas and Shudras ceased to be caste post Vedic age. If Congress puts Hindus on the pyre for Muslim votes, then BJP is doing the same with GC. Um, okay. In contrast to this, the way of life of the Shudra signified menial service. The correct Brahman cannot join the modern army because he would have to, excuse me, obey superiors from a lower caste or of barbarian descent. The classical sources subsume occupations under menial service for other castes in a far more explicit and literal sense than anywhere else. This is to be explained by the characteristically Indian organization of the primeval village crafts. As briefly indicated above, workers who were enumerated in English terminology as members of an enumerated space गलती से दे दिया वहाँ पे मैंने सोचा कोई Latin term है were enumerated in English terminology as members of an quote unquote establishment were actually kinds of cottagers, not serfs of individual employers, but village helots to whom were leased small hereditary holdings. In Deccan, under the Marathas, two typical categories of such village servants were to be found: the Baru Balote, comprising the ancient typical crafts of carpenter, blacksmith, cobbler, potter, barber, washerman, bard, astrologer, leather worker, watchman, effigy cleaner, mullah. In pure Hindu villages, the butchers of a sacrificial sheep were called mullah. And the Baru Alote, comprising the अच्छा ये स्पेलिंग तो कुछ घपला लग रहा है उच्चारण कुछ और होगा BARUH बड़ू एंड अलोटे ALOWTAY is is this supposed to be a Marathi word? The Baru Alote, comprising the later crafts of the gold and coppersmith, blacksmith, water carrier, janitor of the village gate, and courier, gardener, oil presser, teli, and a number of religious clerks. Not all positions were actually filled. The composition of these village servants was not typical throughout. In Bombay province, the Mahars were found among them. Formerly, they were peasants. Then, as expert boundary surveyors, they were degraded to village servants and settled on outlying plots. Nowadays, they frequently become chauffeurs despite conservative protests. As a rule, the village compensated them for their services not by payment for single services but by a fixed share of the harvest yields or wages in kind. The kinds of artisans who belonged to this group varied in different regions, but in the main, they are typical for all India to this day. If we examine the Indian castes in terms of occupational composition, we find that rarely does a Brahman or Rajput, no matter how deeply degraded, ever take up one of the ancient crafts. Rajput peasants, however, are quite frequent. In fact, the majority of their caste are peasants. But even today, the Rajput who does his own ploughing is degraded, in contrast to the absentee owner. Hence, increasing profits through overseas export, among other things, permitted a rapid increase of landlordism. Other castes which claim Kshatriya rank usually demand precedence over quote unquote rusticated Rajputs. The ancient characteristic rejection of the trader and the tradition of court service led the Rajputs to prefer even the lowest forms of domestic service held to be ritually pure rather than engaging in a craft. From the other side of the status hierarchy, there is a great demand for high caste domestics. Such persons might be ritually pure and capable in order to serve the lord and lady physically, particularly to serve water to them. Weber is Tanti then. What is Tanti? Here to learn is saying you should read Varna Jati Cast by Rajiv Malhotra, forward by David Frawley. Why should I read it? Here to learn? Oh, Tanti, अच्छा, Tati, Tati. Weaver से weaver आया, nice. Okay, now subchapter 1 in this chapter, the Brahmans. To some extent, the same circumstance determines certain monopolies of the caste, present day Brahman caste, particularly the employment of almost exclusively Brahman cooks in high caste houses. For the rest, the Brahmans were and are infiltrating occupations, particularly administrative posts, which demand writing skill and education, just as the clerics of our Middle Ages. In the South, the Brahmins have maintained a monopoly of administrative positions into modern times. Ritualistic obligations made it difficult for the Brahmins to enter the medical profession, and they are but sparsely represented in the field of engineering. All of this is quite in agreement with the Indian tradition of dividing the castes into four types. The law books mirror other features of prescribed lifestyles of the upper castes, which bear the stamp of authenticity and in part of great antiquity. The law books hold a man to be degraded unless he acquires the holy belt before an affixed and prescribed age limit. Furthermore, they recognize typical patterns of conduct for different age levels, which actually held only for the highest caste, the Brahmins. The Brahmins have never been a tribe, although more than half of them live in the upper Ganges Valley, their home base, and in Bengal. Originally, the Brahmins were magicians who developed into a hierocratic caste of cultured men. They had to undergo a course of instruction, which even in classical times consisted only in learning the sacred or magical formulae and ritualistic practices, and in the mechanical rote learning of the orally transmitted Vedas under the tutelage of a freely chosen Brahmanical teacher who recited the classical works word for word. This kind of preparation, externally a purely literary schooling of priests, contained vestiges of ancient magical asceticism, which permit us to recognize the origin of the Brahmins out of primeval magicians. The general stages in the development of the Brahmins into a caste is clear, but not its causes. Obviously, the priesthood of the Vedic period was not a closed hereditary status group, even though the priesthood of the Vedic period was not a closed hereditary status group, even though the clan charisma of certain priestly sibs was established in the eyes of the people alongside the personal charisma of the ancient magician. Among the functionally specialized priests, the Hotar or fire priest played the chief role in cult practices. The historical ascendancy of the Brahmins seems to have several reasons. Perhaps the older assumption holds that the increasingly stereotyped cult practices and magical formulae made the master of sacrificial ceremonies, that is, the Brahman, more and more the decisive leader. The main cause, however, may have been the increasing significance of family priests of nobles and princes as opposed to those administering the community sacrifice. Okay. This would suggest, if this modern assumption is correct, the diminishing importance of the military association in contrast to that of the prince and his vassals. The magicians had invaded the circles of ancient priestly nobles and finally had taken over their legacy. The ascent of the Brahmins from magical family chaplaincy explains why the development of priestly office, quote unquote office, remained quite alien to the Hindu priesthood. Interesting. Ascent of the Brahmins from magical quote unquote family chaplaincy explains why the development of priestly office remained quite alien to the Hindu priesthood. Their position represents a specialized development from the universally diffused guild organization as of magicians and their development into a hereditary caste with ever rising status claims. At the same time, the development was a triumph of knowledge, quote unquote knowledge, or magically effective formulae over the merely empirical, quote unquote, craft of the ancient priests. At any rate, the very power of the Brahmins is connected with the increasing significance of magic in all spheres of life. The school of the Atharva Veda, with its collection of specifically magical formulae, demanded that the princely house chaplains be taken always from their midst. Astrology and other specific forms of Brahmanical knowledge originated in this school. There are sufficient indications in the law books to prove that magic did not triumph in all spheres of life without a struggle. It was consummated only during the course of the Brahman's ascent to power. A king's triumph in battle, as well as other successes in life, were thought to depend upon successful sorcery. Failure was ascribed to the family priest or to the actor's own ritual offenses. Since the knowledge of the Brahmins was secret, the monopoly of education by their own progeny resulted automatically. Thus, alongside educational qualification for the priesthood, there appeared qualification by birth. The, the Dekapaya, a part of the sacrifice. This is probably spelled weirdly, probably has some other Sanskrit pronunciation. Decapaya. The Dekapaya, a part of the sacrifice, required genealogical proof that the ancestors of the officiating priests had been soma drinkers for 10 generations. Presumably, their merits were mediated upon during the sacrifice. Only in obscure residua did the old conception survive, which based Brahman quality upon personal charisma. The novice Brahmacharin, the student Brahman, was still subjected to the severe regulation of life characteristic of magical asceticism. Particularly, sexual and economic asceticism were required. According to ancient conceptions, the novice had to live chastely and by mendicancy. The teacher, by magical means, quote unquote, made a Brahman out of the disciple, originally irrespective of his descent. Originally irrespective of his descent. Kabhi na kabhi, at least, this was removed from his birth-based lineage. Okay, again, even Max Weber is saying it. Irfan Habib has said this. Many other people have said this. And in fact, the Brahma Puran, Lord Shiva himself says this. The decisive source of power of the full Brahman was his learning of the Vedas, a learning which was viewed as peculiarly charismatic. A Brahman reproached because he was born of a Shudra woman answered his opponent by proposing a fire ordeal to decide who had the greater Vedic knowledge. After completing his education and the appropriate ceremonies, the Brahman was expected to establish a household, become a grihastha. He now became an active Brahman. If he engaged at all in professional work and did not remain a rentier or take up one of the permissible emergency pursuits. Brahmanical activities consisted of sacrifice and instruction. Brahmins were economically bound so rigidly and visibly by etiquette that they could not use their personal services to earn their livelihoods in the manner of a vocation. Because this is why there's no point for a right winger to get angry with Max Weber, because even if he gets things wrong, as pointed out by Rovila Thapar, because he was simply operating on British data, sitting in Germany, he does not harbor ill intentions. क्योंकि फर्स्ट चैप्टर में तो सिर्फ एप्रिसिएशन ही है इंडियन सोसाइटी के लिए, हिंदू सोसाइटी के लिए, और यहाँ पे भी जब भी चांस मिल रहा है ऐसे पॉजिटिव फैक्ट्स बता रहे हैं जो कि आज इंडियन राइट विंग में जिस आर्ग्यूमेंट्स को या फिर जिस फैक्टॉइड्स को पॉजिटिव या फिर कॉम्प्लीमेंट्स माना जाता है, वो सब भी बार बार दे रहे हैं. See, this is the point I have been making since the day I finished reading Manusmriti. This is exactly what he is repeating here. Brahmins were economically bound so rigidly and visibly by etiquette that they could not use their personal services to earn their livelihoods in the manner of a vocation. I should underline this because this is a line we repeatedly bring up from reading Manusmriti, now even Max Weber. The Brahman accepted only gifts, dakshina, not pay. The giving of gifts for the use of their services was, of course, a ritualistic duty. Sacrifice without gifts brought evil and enchantment. Moreover, his magical power enabled the Brahman to avenge severely the denial of gifts by curses or intentional ritualistic errors in the performance of the sacrifice, bringing misfortune to the lord of the sacrifice. Then the question arises that today, I have seen only Bengali households through this, but all of them are those proud regionalist Bengali types who don't miss any puja, but also haggle, bargain their asses off with the priest, and also tell them to do a quicker version of all the rituals. Do it fast, do it quicker, skip some verses. And here I cannot help but have some respect for at least the logical consistency of an atheist. These guys believe in the rituals, the puja, but want their own absolutely random, made up distortions to it. They want it to be done quicker, faster, cheaper. How does that work? On what level, on what realm am I supposed to diagnose this hypocrisy? And is it simply hypocrisy? Sounds too polite a word, doesn't it? What should we call this? I don't know. Hypocrisy, insanity, ये सभी दिमाग में आ रहा है. But what the hell is this? Righteous vengeance was actually developed into a methodical procedure. The minimum value of gifts was stipulated and unfair competition among Brahmans prohibited. It was permissible and, under certain conditions, prescribed for the Brahman to inquire in advance as to the size of the intended gift. Their tremendous magical power permitted the Brahmans, in a Weber's expression, the true orgies of covetousness. We are reminded of the well-known passage in Goethe's Faust concerning the stomach of the church, when we read the principle that nothing can harm the Brahman's belly. It has, however, only ritualistic significance. A Brahman could atone by simple means for any or almost any offense against dietary ritual. DS is saying hypocrisy is there, especially the commercialization of Durga Puja nowadays in Kolkata shows that. Commercialization. DS, why is that a hypocrisy? Is it not supposed to be commercial? I mean, people who are giving ads, let's say, that's what you are terming commercialization, right? So, aren't you supposed to patronize pujas? That's not the case. People are supposed to send gifts for pujas. It has forever happened. Merchants have forever co-funded pujas. So if that's not commercialization, how is ads all around the pandal commercialization? There is other black commercialization, of course, that you rake up this much of funds for a Durga Puja and keep 50% of it and show a different amount. You whiten your black money, etc. That stuff is different. That's just simple corruption. But that's not commercialization. Shaik is saying it doesn't work. Most purohits are of substandard. Most yajmans don't believe in that they do. Most Hindus are atheists anyways until the shit hits the fan. God is not a fair-weathered friend. It's a problem with mostly with beef and alcohol drinking Bengalis during pujas. Chopped BBK packer. Tamasic understanding. The social and economic privileges of the Brahmins were unsurpassed by those of any other priesthood. Even the excrement of a Brahman could have religious meaning as a divination means. The principle of ajuchyata, forbidding the oppression of a Brahman, included, among other things, that a judge must never adjudicate in favor of a non-Brahman against a Brahman. The area respect due to a Brahman, or at least the Brahman's claim to respect, was higher than a king's. Yeah, that was just a claim. It was not followed through all the time, of course. There are many examples to that effect. There might be counter examples as well, because India is a huge diverse country. But this one is pretty interesting. I see modern examples of this as well for other people who are basically the Brahmins of today, who are not considered, who don't even remember that they are the Brahmins of today. For example, that example I gave in the beginning. Some upper caste, definitely today and in the past, have threatened and beaten some lower caste with a stick. Today it's a Jai Bhim guy beating up an OBC with a stick, saying, say Jai Bhim or else. So in the same way, we can sue some people and we cannot sue some people in today's court of law, under today's secular constitution. So you see, history doesn't repeat. It rhymes. It goes on rhyming. You just have to recognize patterns or else you'll go crazy. DS is saying, yeah, commercialization should be there, but not on the expense of puja, just like Chandanagar Jagadhatri Puja. I'm talking about the mass art thing started by that Tala Pratyaya guy. But how and by what logic, let's say, what consistent argument, by what consistent argument would you draw some line even here? Would you say that, okay, this much of advertisements are fine and this much of advertisements are not fine? Mm, at what stage do you think it becomes, quote unquote, at the expense of the puja? Because if the advertisements, or let's say involvement of non-believers, or even the people doing the main puja, organizing the main puja, are non-believers, if that is creating that quote unquote expense of the of puja, then that has been also happening for a pretty long time, at least for, let's say, 80 years, 50, 80 years. So if you go to ta, okay, let's wait for your full comment. No, even the Tala Pratyaya guy, the whatever art he made, remember, that's not the main puja murti, right? The main puja murti is never the ones visible to your eyes from a distance. The main one is a small idol in front of the stage. Rajasic commercialization, Shabi ki puja. Dipayan, I don't think so. Shudip is saying it is basically a result of and not the cause of that. In any large scale pujas, the bhakti is almost non existent. I agree. Theme is not a problem, but when the theme completely outweighs the actual puja paddhati and veneration of the Divine Mother, then it's a problem. Theme was never a problem. Yeah, but Shayok, how is that happening? Let's say I decide today I'll do a puja, and the theme will be the biggest and most costly puja that has ever happened. Does me making that decision inherently therefore decrease my devotion, or are you arguing that if I focus on that, I will end up sacrifice, or let's say just not putting in full effort into the puja paddhati? Are you saying that is what is happening? Because they are targeting that, therefore they are sacrificing the puja paddhati. I'm saying that they are simple hypocrites who think of God as an ATM and think all this black money whitening will give them some fruits. I'm saying the puja paddhati is getting sacrificed even if they don't do any of the commercialization. But are you saying if they spend this much amount of money in themes and stuff, only then their puja paddhati gets harmed? Okay, Shaik is saying it's happening because of the lack of interest and lack of pedagogy of purohits and tantras, of shastric education and so on. Yeah, but that's not happening because people are spending a lot of money on the pujas, right? DS is saying, like, if you visit Chandanagar in Jagadhatri Puja, you will see pandals, lightings, full technology, but still there will be traditional idol according to Dhyan Mantra. Okay. What is stopping those people involved in those pujas from not becoming like the guys in Kolkata? I don't see how the sponsorship of the puja is a factor. I see simply the cultural environment differences between Chandanagar and Kolkata. Hence, BBKs of Chandanagar are not really BBKs. Chandanagar is very Kolkata-like, but it's still not Kolkata. Kolkata is that kind of thing, which we always criticize. Constituents 26 lost for Bengali Hindus. Dipan, no. That last thing is not going to come now. It's going to go on for a longer while. Shaik is saying it's all if they spend a shit ton of money on theme, then they should also stipulate a certain amount for the process so that the puja is done properly. But I'm sorry to say they overspend on. Yeah, but when they overspend on theme, do they actively take away some money from the actual puja part? Do they do that? I don't know. I've never been involved in an organization of a puja. I'm just very curious about this situation. And there's almost nothing left to spend on puja acharas and other stuff. They actually do that. That, okay, I spent so much on the theme, now I don't have proper money for the samagris and puja paddhati. Do they do that? If that is so, then oh my god. All my criticisms that I have for this society that needs to be turned up a notch. My God, क्या अजीब सोसाइटी है भाई ये. और इस सोसाइटी के लिए बीजेपी कार्यकर्ता जान देते फिरेंगे. लास्ट चांस, लास्ट इलेक्शन फॉर हिंदूज बोल बोल के, जो हिंदू ऐसा कर रहे हैं. DSC saying, you are right, that place is also very open to business and they are rich from the time of Indranaran Chaudhary. Yes, actually the Atlam of the Kolkata people. Right, exactly. Okay. The peculiarities of the Brahmins as a religious status group will be discussed below in part 2. Here we are concerned only with the economic advantages that accompanied the specific caste claims for Danam, gifts. The classical form of compensation on the part of distinguished lords consisted in land grants, cattle, rents dependent on land, or tax yields, money, jewelry, and precious objects in that order. At least according to Brahmanical theory, the right to receive land grants was a monopoly of the Brahman caste and its most important economic privilege. The innumerable inscriptions concerning prebendal foundation, meaning the majority, which is the majority of all preserved Indian inscriptions, prove that actually the physical full caste Brahman of the Indian Middle Ages was a hereditary prebendary. The typical and originally the highest station of the Brahman, however, was and remained Purohita, house chaplain of one or several princes. You see, these are the areas where Max Weber begins to make actually stumbles upon wrong findings and conclusions, because he was operating on on almost idiotic British data. This is where Romila Thapar criticizes him. But this is where Irfan Habib, Declan Quigley, Nicholas Dirks have done a better job, which is his assumption is that Brahmins were only Purohits, and only Purohits for the biggest landlords and kings, etc. तो भाई बाकी इतने सारे ब्राह्मण्स क्या कर रहे थे? छोटे मोटे लोगों के घर में पूजा तो होता था, वो पूजा करने के लिए राजा का ब्राह्मण तो नहीं आता था. तो वो जो गरीब ब्राह्मण होता था उसको कौन सा क्या लैंड ग्रांट मिल रहा था? एक ही ब्राह्मण घूम घूम के सब जगह पे पूजा करता था थोड़ी. तो ये कॉन्सेंट्रिक सर्कल्स है ऑफ पावर एंड स्टेटस. लिटिल किंग्स है, हर जगह पे कोई दादा बन के घूम रहा है छोटे मोटे सर्कल्स में. ये मैक्स वेबर मिस कर गए. अब ऐसे ये वेबर हुआ तो मनुवाद नहीं गया. फर्स्ट चैप्टर से ही देख रहे हैं. Shaik is saying most Kolkata babus actually good pujas happen, no doubt. But British men eating beef, wine, oh yeah, oh, that's insane, incredible stuff. Alapon is saying Kattar commie friend of mine is going to vote BJP, but does commie votes matter? Commie votes don't matter, but BJP is really going hard after commie votes this time, because the other stuff is not possible, the other ways of winning in Bengal. तो जो बचे कुचे भद्रो वोट्स ऑफ सीपीआईएम है, आज कोई जो सीपीआईएम का वोटर है उसके आइडियाज जितने भी चुतिए हो, आफ्टर ऑल मोरलेस तो भद्रो एडुकेटेड गाय ही है. सीपीएम के गुंडे लोग तो आज सीपीएम में नहीं है. तो आई एम श्योर योर फ्रेंड इज अ very well educated, nice person. He and I would probably hang out and have a great time. But their numbers are very low, and not all of them are going to vote for BJP. Therefore, I think it is pointless anyway. Max Weber is actually from Nagpur. Sudeep is saying they do, it's 5%, it will bridge the gap, not talking about Kolkata but other places. As per reports, Bangladeshi workers are fleeing from all over India. From all over India, nahi, I think from Bengal, they are fleeing to other parts of India. And I know some commies who are now BJP Karyakartas, right? Yeah, we just interviewed such a guy. Let me see some other comments. Shaik is saying, and this has been the case since British times, pujas were show-offs of babus actually, and zamindars to attract English money. Shayok, you know that I can extrapolate this, or let's say, find similar situations even today, right? पूजाज, मंदिर, ये सब का चक्कर में हमेशा से ऐसे घपले होते रहते हैं. ये बहुत कॉमन है. बोनगा लोकल फक. I know some comments. So think of the donations, gifts that Cholas were receiving for their temples from the Srivijaya kingdom. I always mix up between the uh, Kadaram and Srivijaya empires. Which one was actually having a fight with Srivijaya? With the Cholas? Srivijaya probably, right? So when Cholas already have a suspicion on them or are already pissed off with them, that why are you disrupting business so much? They keep the Cholas happy by simply sending gifts for their temples. तो इसका क्या करें? तो तब भी टेम्पल बनाने का जो इकोसिस्टम था उसमें ऐसे चीजें हो रहे थे. अभी ममता बनर्जी जो कर रही है, this is not very starkly different from what has happened in history. Many people have done this. Just make a temple to show off your credentials, become more relevant, etc. Some days back, I heard an incredible story from home. Oh yeah, my Odia friend Mahapatro. He's from a family that has lived in Mednipur for about 280 years. They don't even remember if they are Odia or not. Their surnames are Das Mahapatro, but they speak fluent Bengali. You will never recognize any Odisha or any Odia accent and stuff. But their family, for all that 280 years, has been famous for a very, very big, famous, popular Durga Puja. So my guess is obviously they started that to garner some acceptance, to, let's say, assimilate in that society. They didn't probably even come here. They were probably here, but that region became sort of Vanga. Then they decided, let's do Durga Puja. So then what even Meenakshi Jain has pointed out, that yes, there are instances of fights between Hindu kings leading to a temple getting, or at least the idols getting stolen and stuff. But that was not for destruction of the temple, right? That was because that that victorious king wanted to show off that he is a bigger Hindu than this guy, and made his bigger temple and took his idol and established it in his temple. So building temples has always been a way to show off your credentials, and that has led to serious side effects which we are facing the brunt of today. They did not realize it back then. आज हम देख रहे हैं कि कोई भी चुतिया के मंदिर बना के किसी को भी मुर्गा कर रहा है. आज ये बंद होना पड़ेगा. Is Sri Lanka really that clean? If so, how? Its weather is different. Cholas didn't invite white men and held wine parties in the temple premises. Temple rituals were sacrosanct, yes, but the core essence was same. And more importantly, there were no white people to invite. Idols were also sometimes stolen so that deity residing in that idol starts blessing the... Yeah, exactly. Like Bomer Kali and Uttamer Kali. Thus, he was the spiritual director of the Brahman, the spiritual director of the prince in personal and political affairs. Upon this position, the quote-unquote bread of Brahmanhood, as it was called, depended. From it was derived the political and social power of the caste. That's where is wrong here. This has been shown by many other scholars whom we repeatedly discuss. These are the critiques of Max Weber by Romila Thapar. A king without a Purohita could hardly be a full king. Similarly, a Brahman without a king could hardly be a full Brahman. No, that's not the case. To this day, the power of the Brahman rests more upon his position as father confessor and his indispensability for the many family ceremonies of a distinguished household than upon the almost negligible caste organization per se. In their role as house priests, the Brahmins imposed upon ambitious castes certain features of the social order, sib and marriage system. This did not result from any decision by some authoritative organ of their caste. Economically, the place of the Brahmanical house priest was somewhat similar to that of our house physician. Okay, these are the guys I'm talking about. It was a principle that one should not, without need, exchange a priest once he had been used, according to ancient sources, at least not within the same year. This is matched by the protection of the Jajmani relation against the competition of other Brahmins through strict etiquette. This is similar to the behavior of our house physicians, who commonly adhere to such formalities in the interest of their status situation, and to the damage of the patient. This voluntary patronage relation substitutes for the dioceses of a hierarchically organized church. Voluntary patronage है, इसीलिए हमको हायरार्किकली ऑर्गेनाइज्ड चर्च नहीं जरूरत होता है. देखो भाई, ये है रिसर्च, इसे कहते हैं सोशल साइंस. यू कैन गेट थिंग्स रॉन्ग, बट द वे ऑफ थिंकिंग, द मेथोडोलॉजी, वहीं पे असली रस है. Because so many people wonder about this, no, and not many people have fruitful answers. This voluntary patronage relation substitutes for the dioceses of a hierarchically organized church. तो देखो, decentralization, flexibility, and a room for evolution, not a centralized command center. इसीलिए convert नहीं कर पाए. Thus, the total position of the Brahman has remained similar to that of the ancient sorcerer and medicine man. Here to learn is saying, oh my god, that TMC kid told me Dighapuri is holier than Dighapuri. Oh, do you mean Digha's Jagannath Cultural Center is holier than Puri because of Devdasis? And I'm sure he believes in God, rituals, astrology, chanting, mantras. Genuinely believes them, I'm sure. And to address this guy, our rich boomer Hindu babus and godmen are sitting in woke urban centers and writing 16-17 points about how to rectify Hindu society today by making them do things that your friend probably already does. Has anyone seen the last IIP video where he says Abrahamic God is derived from Varun Dev? IIP kya hai? So far as I understand, the situation wasn't like that in Assam. Sudeep, are you talking to Here to Learn or me? When the Brahman sees the son of his son, he is expected to retire. Oh, ये तो हमने मनुस्मृति में पढ़ा था. अच्छा, Indian pixels. ये हमने मनुस्मृति में पढ़ा था. When the Brahman sees the son of his son, he is expected to retire from the household and become a forest dweller. और एक क्राइटेरिया है, अगर स्किन बहुत ड्रूपी हो जाते हैं, अगर तुम अंबानी जैसे दिखने लगो, तब तुमको रिटायर करना है. As a forest dweller, he is able through ascetic exercises to achieve the miraculous power of a magician and the power to enchant deities and men. Thus, he concludes his life as an apotheosized Superman. This caste duty too, a caste duty which today is essentially theoretical. Theoretical क्यों है? कोई follow क्यों नहीं करता है? इतने सारे true Brahmins? क्योंकि ritual backdoor मिल गया है. Anyway, today is essentially theoretical, is a survival of the magician's organization by age classes. He's comparing it to other similar situations elsewhere. As a rule, distinguished Brahmins never become permanent employees of a congregation or parish. Hindu religion has no congregation. Moreover, high caste Brahmins never become the hired priests of Hindu sects or village associations. High caste Brahmins, again, Max Weber shows his genius. He's pointing out that there in fact is something called high caste Brahmins and therefore there is something called low caste Brahmins. Moreover, high caste Brahmins never become the hired priests of Hindu sects or village associations. Brahmins often serve as Vishnu priests and also perform lowly services in temples, for instance, in well-paid positions of the Vallabhakhari sect and with the Gujarat Yajurvedis. But when they do, they always incur some degradation. As we shall see later, the relation between Hindu sect members and priests or mystagogues is very different from that of an Occidental sect with its employed ministry. No high caste Brahman is or was gladly the quote-unquote servant of a community like a Shudra. Even to accept a position as temple priest could, under certain conditions, strongly degrade him. These facts are partially correlated with the social peculiarity of Brahmanhood as a sorcerer's caste, partially with the feudal structure of Indian society, exactly, and partially, however, with the position held by priests in tribes and village communities before Hinduization. Reason for plastic surgery invention by Sushruta. He did rhinoplasty. A lot of Hatha Yoga can stop droopy skin too. Botox and... College, Neon is saying, Dada, have you covered the second book of J. Deepak on in? Couldn't find it. No, no, no. No, I do not plan to. Because I was explicitly told by J. Deepak when I started doing the first book that no, don't do this. The publishers will come after you. And he told me that they were about to come after me. He told the publishers that no, he means well. He's just trying to not. He's just trying to popularize the book, etc. So और कुछ मत करो. Then so therefore I stopped. Maybe members only में कर सकेंगे. Probably, yeah. Koreans should bow down and pray to Shushruta every day. Visit communities before. The cult practitioner belonged in general simply to the hereditary establishment, quote unquote, establishment of the village, like the mullah, and all sorts of present day temple servants. The single pariah tribes, which gradually turned into Hindu castes, not only had deities of their own en masse, but also their own priests, who became caste gods and caste priests. The artisan, this is the accommodating nature of Hinduism, which if you say happened, you will be termed a missionary propagandist by some, or those Gaudiya warrior people will say you are simply lying. The artisan castes, who were interspersed among other castes, have with great stubbornness continued to insist on exclusive service by members of their own caste in opposition to the Brahmins. Hmm. Mm-hmm. The Kammalars, for example, may serve in place of many others which the census reports discover in present day India. These skilled metalwood and stone workers claim to stem from the artisan god Vishwakarma. Upon the call of kings, they dispersed widely to Burma, Ceylon, Java, and claimed the ranks of priests and also that of newly arrived itinerant Brahmins. As magical artisans as well, they obviously served other castes as gurus, ministering to the individual. Quote, the Kamalar is everybody's guru, end quote. Tribal castes living in separate villages regularly retained their traditional priests. Retained. Were allowed to retain. ये कैसा Aryan invasion है? The Brahmins won influence over these tribal priests, essentially through their superior education, particularly their astrological learning, which was beyond the competition of village and caste priests. To the Brahmins, of course, such priests were completely degraded insofar as they accepted their existence at all, self-evidently for all impure castes and objectionable in the case of pure castes. Self-evidently for all impure castes and objectionable in the case of pure castes. Occasionally, as we saw, tribal priests serving ruling sibs won recognition as Brahmins, though usually as socially declassed Brahmins. It is not a... Hence, you see, Mamta Banerjee, who's not remotely Aryan looking, is a Banerjee. ये है accommodation of different cultures into the Hinduism fold, into the Vedic fold. It is not our purpose here to pursue the extensive social differentiation of Brahmins which resulted from this, and from the declassing of Brahmins serving despised castes that has been done by Declan Quigley. Nor shall we examine the caste rank of the numerous Brahmins, today the majority, who have changed their callings. Our concern is only the close connection between the special position of the Brahmins and that of the kings and noble castes like Kshatriyas. Now, subchapter 2, the Kshatriyas. What a great book. Here to learn is saying he's a devotee of Kali and Tripura Sundari. Makes paintings of gods, lives in Tripura. Das surname thinks we oppose it only because a woman made Digha temple like Rani Rashmani made Dakshineshwar was opposed. Yeah. इनको तुम पूजा पाठ बढ़ा के और एस्ट्रोलॉजी पे बिलीफ बढ़ा के कैसे तुम रियल हिंदुत्व फर्दर करोगे. MMA fighters should thank Shushruta the most. Incidentally, Shushruta also refers that most of his patients were warriors and soldiers. और कौन आएंगे? Yes, आना ही तो है. अच्छा, here to learn's devout Hindu friend hates Ram Mandir because it's supposedly unscriptural. Dogs were displaced to build it. ऐसा कौन सा मंदिर है in the history of Hinduism जिसके लिए डॉग्स को डिस्प्लेस नहीं होना पड़ा। जहां पे भी मंदिर बना है आज से पहले आज तक, वहां पे कोई ना कोई स्ट्रे डॉग आराम से चिल करता था मंदिर बनने से पहले। क्या ये अजीब आर्ग्यूमेंट मिला इसको। In some remote village in Rajasthan, a Dalit wasn't allowed to donate for Ram Mandir. Oh yeah, that's the Rajasthan's problem. How is that Ram Mandir's problem? My God. Here to learn, have you told him Ashok Singhal's story, how he rejuvenated the Ram Mandir with the specific goal of demolishing caste atrocities and caste-based bad behavior? Bhai, क्या misinformation है। और काउंटर करने का समय जा रहा है जल्दी। काउंटर करते करते कांग्रेस वापस ही आ जाएगा। The Kshatriyas. The ancient Indian warlord of the Vedas is Primus inter pares among the Maghavan, who suggests somewhat the nobles of Phocaea, Phocaea. In classical times, these gentes were replaced by the Kshatriya caste, which later substantially disappeared. In the oldest sources, we discern the dawn beginnings of military organization in India. We find castle-dwelling kings of the Homeric type with their sibs and followings, kingsmen, the universally diffused charismatic heroism in the manner of the Nordic berserks, the Israelite Moshuas, the charismatic degen of charismatic warrior chieftains. All these belong to the past and only traces of them survived in epic times. The ancient, universally diffused organization of warriors as a brotherhood of young men, the systematic magical hero asceticism of boys, the stages in the warrior novitiate, initiation of the FABs into the fratry of bachelors living in collective economy with captured girls in longhouses, the retirement of ex-service militiamen into marriage and domesticity, the reservations made for elders, like in Japan, Inkyo, unable to serve, the reservations made for elders unable to serve, all these have vanished. Indeed, vestiges survive of the ancient charismatic warrior probation and of the principle that a man disqualified for the armed forces remains a woman, i.e., deprived of political rights. They survive in the highly important Upanayana ceremonies, ancient initiation rites, which the boys of a twice born caste, thus far Shudras like women, had to undergo before securing membership status. But the ceremony itself, completed at a very early age, was a vestige comparable to our quote unquote confirmation, like in Christianity. So he's saying कि ये Francis competition बन चुका है. The Kshatriya of classical literature lacked the नेटिजन इज सेइंग जब तक एक पॉइंट याद आया इसलिए मैंने पॉज लिया जब तक राहुल गांधी है कांग्रेस के टॉप पे तब तक कांग्रेस नहीं है आई डोंट थिंक सो नेटिजन क्योंकि हमसे बहुत यंग लोग वोट देने को आएंगे ना हर हर रोज एक बच्चा 18 का उम्र का हो रहा है 29 तक सोचो कितने लोग कितने बच्चे 18 के होंगे 26 के होंगे जिन्होंने कभी कांग्रेस रूल देखा ही नहीं है ऐसे नहीं चलता है व्हाट आई एम सेइंग इज ये जो एक आई थिंक रिकरिंग पैटर्न है हिंदू रिचुअल्स का या फिर बिहेवियर पैटर्न्स का नॉट इन एवरी रेल्म इन ओनली द रिलीजियस रेल्म कि वी सी ये सिर्फ नाम के वास्ते हो रहा है वो फैंसी ड्रेस कंपटीशन के जैसे हो रहा है इसका ऑपोजिट है I don't mean modernizing Hinduism. What I mean is keeping Hinduism alive literally. कि हिंदुइज्म या फिर कोई भी अपना सेक्ट का जो टीचिंग्स है उसके मॉडर्न इक्विवेलेंस ढूंढो वहां पे हिंदुइज्म को जिंदा रखो वो करने से मेरा ख्याल है कि एक्चुअली इम्प्रूवमेंट कुछ सिग्निफिकेंट हेल्प होगा हिंदू सोसाइटी का इफ यू ट्रूली इम्बाइब द टीचिंग्स एटसेट्रा मगर ये सिर्फ मगअप करके और पॉडकास्ट के लाइन इधर उधर बोल के या फिर फैंसी ड्रेस कंपटीशन के तरीके से करने से तो कुछ नहीं होगा और जिनको बोला जा रहा है कि और भी फैंसी ड्रेस कंपटीशन करो 16-17 पॉइंट्स में वो सब तो इनके ऐसे हिंदू दोस्त ऑलरेडी कर रहे हैं जो कि एंटी हिंदुत्व है वेहेमेंटली तो फॉर एग्जांपल दिस इज नॉट गोइंग टू डायरेक्टली हेल्प हिंदुइज्म और हिंदूज एनी हाउ बट दिस इज एन एग्जांपल ऑफ व्हाट आई एम प्रपोजिंग के all PhDs get a Janeu, those sorts of things. Yesterday, Rahul Gandhi jumped into some river, was catching fish. Aha, no chance in fisheries. Yeah, those sorts of things. See, the problem is, remember Rene Girard pointed this out. We did a stream on Rene Girard. Uh, so Rene Girard said that Christianity was the first religion which speaks from the perspective of the victim. In every religion before Christianity, only and only the winner was celebrated. And therefore, for that specific, this is the main reason why Nietzsche disliked Christianity and liked Hinduism. कि मास्टर मॉरलिटी, यहाँ पे मॉरलिटी टर्म का मतलब क्या है कि जो भी कंजम्पशन पैटर्न एटसेट्रा, सोचने का तरीका वगैरह रूलर्स का है, वही अच्छा है, वही करेक्ट है, ये मान लेना था मास्टर मॉरलिटी, जो कि बहुत सी के वैसे भी लोग करते हैं. एम्यूलेशन तो करने का चाहत होता ही है सब में. क्रिश्चियनिटी के हाथों से ये शुरू हुआ. विक्टिम जो है, स्केपगोट जो है, उसके नजरिए से एक रिलीजन खड़ा हो गया. तो तब से शुरू हुआ स्लेव मॉरलिटी कि नहीं, ये लोग ऑपरेसर्स है, देयरफॉर ऑपरेसर्स जो करते हैं, जो बोलते हैं, सब गलत है. हम जो करते हैं, हम जो बोलते हैं, जिसके वजह से हम दूसरे के स्लेव है, वो सही है. नाउ सी, isn't that exactly how every Indian thinks, almost every Indian thinks, the Indian state thinks, most Hindus think? तो स्लेव मॉरलिटी का एक बहुत बड़ा इशू है जो कि जाने वाला नहीं है in the near future, because the main ground level 4D chess organization also believes in that. What I'm saying is, Hinduism is a religion of winners. Losers के लिए Hinduism नहीं है. और सारे के सारे लूजर मेंटेलिटी वाले हिंदुइज्म को फैंसी ड्रेस कंपटीशन के तौर पे हक करके पकड़ के बैठे हुए हैं. तो if at all we must do something, we must save Hinduism from Hindus first and foremost. Alapon, yes, of course. This is saying those young kids will be changed into right wing with time, with maturity. The supporters of Raga will change. We were also Kattar left wing during 17-18, but we changed. Even we changed. DS, we changed. A lot of us changed. Not me exactly, but a lot of other people in the rest of the country changed because of that thing, that classic thing of going against the tide. But when going against the tide means becoming a Rahul Gandhi supporter, तब तो problem है. You're only saying, and thus the need of the hour for Hindutva 2.0. Yes. If the parents are not Congress supporters, the kids will most likely not support Congress. No. I think if the parents are not Congress supporters, it means definitely the kids will become Congress supporters in 2019. Okay, let's continue. The Kshatriya of classical literature lacked the special character of our medieval knighthood. Their social position rested on sib and clan charisma and not on a feudal hierarchy. This was true even before the crystallization of caste forms. See, Max Weber is being so fair. The Kshatriyas were and remained kings, sub-kings, and in the lowest stratum, village notables with special economic privileges. Classical sources ascribe to the Kshatriyas the function of protecting the population politically and militarily. The king not furnishing protection for his subjects from thieves and robbers is held liable for damages done to them. Antiquity में ज़्यादा accountability था. According to the sources, each officer, including the tax farmer of later kingdoms, had the same duty of protection and eventual restitution for any damages done to a certain district. आज तो मंदिर बना दो हो जाएगा. The size of the district varied with the size of its central community. So far, this caste duty grew out of experience. Indeed, it contained, as some further evidence indicates, vestiges of the ancient conception of the charismatic role of the king. The king defeated in battle was responsible for the sins of his subjects as well as his own. The king who spoke false justice was magically burdened with the sins of the intentionally or accidentally injured party. A more stringent analogy to the conception underlying the Urteilsscheld in Germanic law. That king is good, whose subjects are prosperous and experience no famine. यही तो है हिंदुइज्म. This is why I like Hinduism. I was not raised a Hindu. I chose Hinduism. This is why um, I'm a proponent of this idea. This is why I believe this culture needs to survive. Not because of the fancy dress Sanatanesi temperaturists. Yes, they can. If we achieve something, it will end up benefiting them, but we won't end up surviving because of them. We will have to survive in spite of them, because they are going to draw us towards a cliff. They are going to run us down a cliff. That king is good, whose subjects are prosperous and experience no famine. Famine was always a sign of magical offense or the charismatic insufficiency of the ruler. Exactly. In case of need, the king does penance. The people may and should get rid of a king found permanently divested of his charisma. Out of these charismatic conceptions, quote unquote, in the great kingdoms of the Indian Middle Ages, there easily developed the theory of patriarchal welfare and protection. Ye welfare hai Yogaksham, not freebies, okay? However, it was eclipsed by the transformation of hero charisma into vocational duty of an estate of knights. वो थोड़ा फैंसी ड्रेस होना शुरू हो गया. Warfare is the dharma of the Kshatriyas in classical and medieval sources, except for the intermissions brought by the universal monarchies. War was as ever present in India as between the ancient city-states. Only when a king had conquered all others was he entitled to the. भाई मैक्स वेबर ने कितना पढ़ाई किया है, देखो ये सब तो डेटा से नहीं मिल रहा है. उसने ब्रिटिश डेटा पूरा इधर का उधर पढ़ लिया है. अर्थशास्त्र पढ़ा है. अर्थशास्त्र कैसे पढ़ा? ये तो अर्थशास्त्र मिलने के पहले लिखा गया है ना? नहीं नहीं, ये शायद 1914 के वक्त लिखा गया है. अर्थशास्त्र वापस मिला कब? 1904 में ना, 1904 में शायद. तो दिख रहा है मुझे कि अर्थशास्त्र साइट किया जा रहा है, या फिर अर्थशास्त्र को साइट करके कोई और टेक्स्ट लिखा गया होगा, वो उसने पढ़ लिया है. मनुस्मृति तो इनसाइड आउट जानता है, ये निज्जा भी जानता था. मुझे ये सब मालूम हुआ है अर्थशास्त्र से. So, welfare is the dharma of the Kshatriyas in classical and medieval sources, except for the intermissions brought by the universal monarchies. War was as ever present in India as between the ancient city-states. Excuse me. और सनातन ऐसी टेम्परेचरिस्ट तुमको बोलते फिरेंगे कि कोई युद्ध नहीं होता था, कोई किसी से के साथ बवाल नहीं करता था, सब पीसफुली यूनाइट होके पूरा का पूरा कंट्री इतना यूनाइटेड था, मगर फिर भी डिस्टिंक्ट सब किंग्स विंग्स लेके सिर्फ चिल करते थे, बिजनेस करते थे. Only when a king had conquered all others was he entitled to the great horse sacrifice which brought the fortunate officiating Brahmans 100,000 cattle. This occurred with approximately the frequency with which the Janus temple in Rome was closed. The celebration is historically ascertained. That a king should ever fail to consider the subjugation of his neighbors by force or fraud remained inconceivable to secular and religious Hindu literature. Wow. When the founder of the Maratha Empire failed to conduct war for 1 year, the neighboring lords considered it a sure indication that he was mortally ill. In the Kshatriya's militaristic code, death in bed was not only considered dishonorable but a sin against caste dharma. When a Kshatriya felt his powers weaken, he was expected to seek death in battle. Hinduism है एक रिलीजन ऑफ द चैड्स, फॉर द चैड्स, बाय द चैड्स. ये दिमाग में स्टैंप कर लो हिंदुत्व सोशलिस्ट भोसड़ी वालों. इसको बनाया जा रहा है ऑफ द लूजर्स, फॉर द लूजर्स, बाय द लूजर्स. एक्चुअली नॉट बाय द लूजर्स, बाय द निजियन विनर्स, फॉर द लूजर्स, ऑफ द लूजर्स. उनको और शीप चाहिए अपने 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 टीम में. According to legend, the old Kshatriyas were wiped off the face of the earth. Vengeance for their enmity toward the Brahmins. ये बढ़िया मजा है. जब भी कोई क्षत्रिय से बवाल होगा, ये ब्राह्मण लोग कुछ ना कुछ टेक्स्ट लिख देंगे और बोलेंगे कि देखो ये क्षत्रिय भोसरी वाला था. There is certainly a grain of truth in this, as in the legend of the struggle of Vishwamitras against Vasishtha. The ancient Kshatriyas about the time of Buddha, 6th century BC, were no, sorry, yeah. The ancient Kshatriyas about the time of Buddha, 6th century BC, were a highly educated estate of urban and castle-dwelling nobles, comparable in this regard to the knighthood of province in the early Middle Ages. They were later displaced by the Rajputs. The Rajputs, partly stemming from what is today Rajputana and southern Oudh, rose in about the 8th century to overlordship and spread through the kingdoms as a typical warrior stratum. Many are illiterate to this day. They correspond to later tribes who entered the caste order by way of service to the great kings as paid knights or mercenaries, the Bhils. The Rajputs formed by far the most distinguished tribe among those supplying mercenaries, among those who supplied mercenaries, and were most completely Hinduized in the manner of the Kshatriyas. Accommodation फिर से हो रहा है भील्स का. क्यों क्यों तो फिर रिजर्वेशन. ऋषभ, yes, t-shirt coat, good idea. The ancient Kshatriya gentes rivaled the Brahmins in education. Wow. As we shall see, the supporters of anti-Brahmanical salvation religions such as Buddhism, as we shall see, the supporters of anti-Brahmanical salvation religions. The Rajputs, on the other hand, had to submit. So yeah, the ancient Kshatriyas. The Rajputs, on the other hand, had to submit to the superior Brahmanical education and, in common with patrimonial kinship, supported the Hindu restoration. The peculiar unclassical segregation of the Rajputs into exogamous subdivisions indicates their derivation from a tribe of mercenary knights. No family tree extends further back than the 5th century, and 90% are settled in North India, especially the northwest. The political feudalism which prevailed in Rajputana until modern times corresponded very closely to the type reported in classical times. The Raja had the best land as a desmine, like in Persian and Khalsa. The vassals, enfiefed with prerogatives, also received land grants. They had to render knightly pay escheated. The Raja had the right, 1, to tax part of the harvest yield, and 2, to dispose of wasteland, which was important because it involved rights to timber, deforestation, and hereditary property rights for payment of a woodcutting tax, and the assumption of rent obligations payable in lump sums. 3, the Raja had the right to mining, treasure seeking, and other similar regalia. And 4, the right to collect fines for punishments. All these economic rights could, in part, also be enfiefed. I think he's getting these from Arthashastra. As a rule, in India, in accordance with the universal principle of clan charisma, only Sib and clan members of the ruling clan tended to be enfiefed. Enfiefed का exact definition थोड़ा देख लेते हैं. Enfiefed का मतलब है under the feudal system to give someone freehold property or land in exchange for their pledged services. Excuse me. As a rule in India, in accordance with the universal principle of clan charisma, only Sib and clan members of the ruling clan tended to be enfiefed. The system was not based upon a personal relation of trust between Sib strangers. It was not based upon a personal relation of trust. In early times, enfiefment did not comprise seigneurial, but meaning royal symbols or royal objects, but only economic and personal rights. Right, so not royal rights, but only economic and personal rights of political origin. The Kshatriyas were royal Sibs, not feudal landlords. बहुत subtle difference है. तो भाई ये सब subtlety, ये सब complexity के लिए तो लंबा streams ही चाहिए. मैं कहाँ से 10-15 मिनट का stream करूँ ये सब समझाने के लिए. हाँ, बहुत सारे 10-15 मिनट के streams हो सकते हैं, but कुछ चीजों के लिए books are still unreplaceable. और फिर एक कॉन्टेम्पलेट करने का भी आई थिंक ईजियर होता है बुक्स में. तो ये पॉडकास्ट डिपेंडेंसी जो है राइट विंग का, ये जल्दी जल्दी खत्म करना पड़ेगा. So in earlier times, enfeoffment, meaning land grant, milna, dena, did not comprise seigneurial, royal, but only economic and personal rights of political origin. So therefore, the Kshatriyas were royal sibs, not feudal landlords. समझे? In the Dravidic states, the king in each village had a royal hide or majha, which was paralleled by the tax-exempt priestly hide, the pahur. We read priester hoof rather than priester stoof. अच्छा, ये एक footnote है. Royal priestly hide, pahur. As his power increased, the king installed his representative, Mata, beside or in place of the old village chieftain, Munda. The charismatically privileged or Dhuinhar, Dhuinhar, Dhuinhar families or Dhuihar families, which supplied these village chiefs had tax-free land, while the other landlots, Khunt, Khunt, had become taxable and were considered the king's land. The conquerors essentially retained this arrangement and generally feudalized it. In the Middle Ages, elements of a truly feudal structure are to be found in most parts of India, particularly in the West, often in quite Occidental form. The Rajas had coats of arms. There were enfeoffments with knightly ceremonies, land grants dena. But the law books knew no true seigneurial rights in the villages. These were a product not of feudalization but of later prebendalization of political authority. एक मिनट फिर से डेफिनेशन देख लेते हैं. Prebending, a canon of a cathedral or collegiate church whose income originally came from a prebend. Or prebend means portion of the revenues of a cathedral or collegiate church formerly granted to a canon or member of the chapter as his stipend. Another term for prebendary. So religious stipend basically. At least portions of it. तो ये एक बहुत सटल और बढ़िया पॉइंट है अगेन. There were enfeoffments with knightly ceremonies, but the law books knew no true seigneurial rights in the villages. The seigneurial rights, the royal rights, were a product of not feudalization, but of later prebendalization of political authority. Prebendalization of political authority therefore क्या है? Political authority जिसके पास है, वो either वो authority में sustain हो रहा है या फिर उसको बढ़ा रहा है by religious land grants. These were a product not of feudalization but of later prebendalization of political authority. Political authority ही दिया जा रहा है वो religious gift के तौर पे, उसके वजह से हो रहा है, उसके वजह से seigneurial rights मिल जा रहे हैं लोगों को. जो कि पहले individual rights था, वो royal rights बन जा रहे हैं. ये लोग जमींदार बनते जा रहे हैं because of prebendalization of political authority. इसे कहते हैं रिसर्च. Many times under the great kings, high military command posts were combined with territorial fiefs, which were turned into hereditary economic rights. After the death of a vassal in combat, his position as leader of the respective troops was given to someone else. The incumbent received several villages as hereditary fief of fallow land. So too with high political posts. Among the great political fief holders, royal descent or relationship was the rule, not however without exception. Exception India में सब समय होता है. The prerogatives of princes, like those of vassals, were considered alienable to a large degree. Bojo. The prerogatives of princes, like those of vassals, were considered alienable to a large degree. Constant feuds occurred over large areas of India, particularly in the South. Epitaphs typically are of knights who fell in battle against cattle thieves and therefore entered heaven. ये क्या cow vigilantism? What was the characteristic derivation of those elements of the Rajput caste most representative of older traditions? The question, okay, interesting question है. एक मिनट थोड़ा mental break लेते हैं, थोड़ा चाय पीने दो. बहुत deep information आज collect कर लिए. Let me check some comments. Tax the cunts. Manifesto. Christianity contradicts itself all the time. Inconsistencies cannot exist in texts that are supposed to be taken literally. More generally, Jnana Mimamsa, just like Karma Mimamsa, was made to solve inconsistencies in Brahmana portions. Due to some corruptions to the scripts, Christianity contradicts with Islam in some cases. Same for Zionism, Judaism, but Islam is the latest Abrahamic vision with clarifications. Yeah, but even they required countless hadiths. We Muslims claim also there is some major contradictions with Christianity, like Trinity. That's right. Okay. So, what was the characteristic derivation of those elements of the Rajput caste most representative of older traditions? The question can best be answered by pointing to the political overlords, such as petty princes, enfiefed knights. Fuck. The questions can best be answered by pointing to the political overlords, such as petty princes, enfiefed knights, छोटे मोटे जमीन जो इनको मिल गए हैं, office nobles, or landlords with political rights and duties. These nobles were never pure scribes, but an estate of politico-military fief holders of quite a different type. These are probably mazumdars, especially including military prebendaries to be discussed presently. No, these are not mazumdars. They they were probably mazumdars at some point. Then they evolved into chaudhris. The changes in Indian organization and administration, particularly military, are bound up in this. The army of the epics and of the oldest historical sources, Megasthenes and Aryan, Ian, is similar though at a more advanced stage than the Homeric army. Heroes or Kura, with their followings, the Aruga, are the champions, dwelling frequently. The leaders of army divisions are not officers or strategists, but particularly good warriors qualified through charismatic heroism. The army was indeed organized for battle. However, combat took place without order. Holy shit. Fuck. The heroes rushed to attack the most worthy opponents. In the epics, the death of the leader automatically signified the defeat of his army. Alongside the king's followings, there were those warriors, such as the office nobles of kings, who could not equip themselves with weapons and chariots, and as well paid warriors of the prince also in peacetime received their wages from the prince. If such paid warriors died, their widows remained in the care of the king. According to Aryan, these warriors, who provided their own weapons, ranked below the nobles and priests, but were separated from the peasants. In addition to organization by phratries, as found in Homer, there appeared already purely tactical divisions of 10, 100, 1000. 10 and 100 and 1000. Elephants and chariots were in typical numerical relation to cavalry and infantry. The armed forces were soon rationally organized, staffed by officers, and supplied and equipped increasingly out of kingly magazines. The army soon lost all traces of a people's militia or a knight's summons. Kingly administration became patrimonial and bureaucratic. On the one hand, it developed a regulated hierarchical order of officials with local and functional competences and appeals. On the other hand, regulated hierarchical order of officials with local and functional competences and appeals. On the other hand, however, administrative and court offices were not kept separate, and the jurisdictional spheres of a bewildering manifold of offices were fluid, indeterminate, irrational, and subject to chance influences. As shown by inscriptions, an elaborate filing system developed as early as the first dynasty of great kings, that of the Maurya 3rd and 4th centuries BC, as is well known from its innumerable edicts in the administration of the great Buddhist king Ashoka. An incredible love of writing developed. In a fashion characteristic of patrimonial bureaucracies, the regents of state territories were relatives. The Arthashastra, dekho, I told you this guy has read the Arthashastra. The Arthashastra, or meaning quote unquote political science of the Kautilya, edited by Chanakya. Acha, this was the view then. कि कौटिल्य कोई है और चाणक्य कोई अलग है. And ascribed to a minister of the great Maurya king Chandragupta, supplements this picture. Comprehensive statistics were to form the basis of administrations. All inhabitants were to be registered by caste sib, calling, meaning calling, kya duty hai mera, possessions and income. Excuse me. The inhabitants were to be required to have passports and were to be controlled throughout their lives. For fiscal authorities, the greatest danger to the state, next to subversion, was thought to be impairment of the will to work. Okay? For fiscal authorities, the greatest danger to the state, next to subversion, was thought to be impairment of the will to work. Union bazi. Therefore, theatres and musical bands in the country, alcohol trade, and inns, INNS, inns everywhere were to be restricted, and the spies of the administration were to report upon the most intimate private life of the subjects. Not all subjects, but yes, definitely some subjects, yes, because every profession was infiltrated by the government. Prostitution was legal but regulated, because half the prostitutes were working for the king. एनिमी राजा या फिर कोई ब्यूरोक्रेट कोई भी कहीं पे कोई घपला कर रहा है कि नहीं, वो उसके ये कार्नल डिजायर के लिए जहाँ पे जाते थे उनसे ही पता चल जाता था, अमात्यस को या फिर राजा को. And yes, there were definitely close watch on subjects, because I remember the Arthashastra saying that cleanliness, hygiene is a top priority of the city administration. So there were very strict laws, very pervasive laws, which has evolved into now a corrupt, distorted babocracy, because it will always end up that way. Therefore, libertarianism is the better way. But um, uh, since city hygiene, cleanliness was such a priority, there were laws saying that if you puke and poop on the road, you will immediately be fined and stuff, lashes, ityadi. But also, if you are an old person, you will not face that punishment, because it might so happen that you end up pooping or puking because simply you are old. If you are drunk, then probably also you got an exemption. I don't remember exactly. मतलब drunk है इसलिए मार पड़ेगी, या फिर drunk है इसलिए उसको छोड़ दिया जाएगा. There was something, either of these of course, but I don't remember. But drunks were specifically mentioned. The other very interesting one was that your house would have regular checkups. Okay, are you maintaining some hygiene inside your home or not? तो वहां पे फिर एग्जाम्पशन था, जब कोई न्यू बॉर्न बेबी होगा घर पे, तब क्लीनलीनेस के लिए उतना स्ट्रिक्टनेस नहीं मेंटेन किया जाएगा, क्योंकि कौन घर संभालेगा जब न्यू बॉर्न बच्चा है घर पे, या इधर उधर हर जगह पूरा मतलब तबाही मचा ही रहेगा. And we don't know how much of these portions were added by the great socialist Ashoka. But more importantly, these sound nice on paper, these leave room for insane corruption and distortion. Okay, let's continue. The king engaged in trade, and his administration by means of market police controlled prices. The Raja still retains trading monopolies for saffron in Kashmir, precious stones in South Asia, horses in the West, weapons and fine textiles in the East, elephants throughout India. In contrast to the conditions presupposed by the Jatskas, JTSKAS, price controls were an element of royal political finance. Furthermore, all conceivable tax sources were exploited, from taxes on mistresses, whom the king kept for the needs of traveling merchants, to money fines on burghers, whom the king, according to the author's advice, would entice to commit punishable offences by means of agent provocateurs. In contrast to Buddhist and other pious sectarian kings, Hindu kings confined the interests of administration essentially to two objectives: the raising of manpower for the army and tax collection. Listen to this sentence again. In contrast, so unlike Buddhist and other pious sectarian kings, Hindu kings confined the interests of administration just to two objectives. Hindu kings were not trying to do anything and everything. Objective दो था, tax collection and manpower for the army. Particularly under the Mughals, the administration increasingly sought to secure both objectives by means of stipulation of taxes in lump sums and prebendalization. A military prebendary assumed the obligation of forming a definite contingent. For this purpose, they will lease the respective tax yields for soldiers' pay, rations, and other necessities. This led to the establishment of Jagir, prebends, which were obviously modeled after the ancient temple and Brahmanical prebends. When invested with the right of disposition of the wasteland, the Jagirdar easily turned into a landlord, even though the origin of the right was politico-military. There were military fiefs similar to the Roman military border fief, the Ghahata. Even after 1000 AD, officials derived their livelihoods essentially from the royal magazines. Okay, even after 1000 AD, officials derived their livelihoods essentially from the royal magazines, and the money and the money economy made headway in public finance by fits and starts, and as in the Middle East, with the assistance of private capital. The king gathered his taxes by farming out their collection or leasing them as a prebend for payment of fixed lump sums. Okay? The king gathered his taxes by farming out their collection or leasing them as a prebend for payment of fixed lump sums. The tax farmers developed into a class of landlords known as zamindari in Bengal and talukdari, particularly in Oudh. Although talukdar is a very common Bengali surname. They became true landlords under the Mughals. Okay, Dar surname se, Da word se jo bhi Bengali surname hai. Remember, all of their ancestors were happily employed under the Muslim kings of Bengal, which is why they have such a surname. They became true landlords only when the British administration held them liable for the tax assessment, treating them for this reason as proprietors. They became true landlords only when the British administration held them liable for the tax assessment, treating them for this reason as proprietors. If one examines the list of their claims under the Mughal rule, their rights originally derive from the custom of holding the guarantors of military and financial contributions of the district responsible for the rest of the administration, including the administration of justice, the cost of which they had to advance. Also, in the Occidental state, at the beginning of modern times, there appeared tax farming and the commissioning of entrepreneurs with army recruitment. Entrepreneurs to whom finance had largely to be entrusted. In India, however, under the great kingdoms, those central institutions failed to develop, which in the West allowed the princes gradually to take back military and financial administration into their own hands. The Marathas were the only ones to reintroduce, in principle, an independent fiscal economy, and precisely for this reason, their administrative techniques was superior to that of the Mughals. RSS का दल्ला फिर से आ गया. सुदीप सिंह सोशलिस्ट साउंड क्यों कर रहा है? हाँ बट सोशलिस्ट थोड़ा बहुत साउंड करेगा ही. फेलियर ऐसे ही हुआ है थोड़ी. And it was not uniform for thousands of years. Degrees तो हमेशा ही चेंज हो रहे थे. ये लाइन तो अंडरलाइन करना पड़ेगा. मराठा ये बहुत कमियों का बॉडी पार्ट्स जलाएगा. मराठा एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन सुपीरियर टू मुगल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, क्योंकि मुगल्स का एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन लेके ही सबसे भाषणबाजी होता है ज्यादा. If the stuff you are reading doesn't get boosted in academia and percolate down to schools and media, entertainment, etc., we are not going to have future voters on our side. And it's not happening. It's not happening at all. Nobody is interested in doing this. सबको ये पैसा कमाने का आसान तरीका समझ में आ गया है. थोड़ा मुस्लिम को थोड़ा गाली वाली दे दो, थोड़ा ये बोल दो कि सब कुछ हमको हमारे टेक्स्ट में थे पहले से ही, और ये हमको पढ़ाया नहीं गया, वो हमको पढ़ाया नहीं गया, ये बोल दो, हो जाएगा। और क्या एग्जैक्टली पढ़ाया नहीं गया, स्टफ लाइक दिस, वो उनको खुद नहीं पता है, क्योंकि अब उनको प्रमाण करना है कि क्या मैक्स वेबर, ये वाइट आदमी, इसको क्या पता। Towards this saying, we are very close to them and we respect Christianity, Judaism. When we all study the Abrahamic history and belief, we find some odds. They study about us, we about them. Relative religious debate culture has been a common thing in the Middle East for years. We debate, not fight. Um, with Judaism, I don't see where you all share mutual respect. It's not just because of Israel since 1949. It has happened since the birth of your religion. My Mazumdar surname, commie friend, is a proud beefeater, so no, don't talk like that. Buddha created one Sangha, but which later got separated into two various sects. So, to quote Max Weber again, the Marathas were the only ones to reintroduce, in principle, an independent fiscal economy. And precisely for this reason, their administrative technique was superior to that of the Mughals. What was I just saying, Shudeep? The rule of the Marathas was simply, at least in intent, that of a national dynasty, while the foreign dominions remained more completely dependent upon middlemen. The Marathas therefore used the Brahman caste for all administrative purposes, including the military. In other regimes, सबसे educated जो लोग हैं उनको काम दे दिया, best guy for the job. In other regimes in general, the lower castes of scribes competed with the Brahmins. Islam especially utilized castes of scribes in opposition to the Brahmins. I see. Interesting. जो लोग स्क्राइब कास्ट में हैं मगर ब्राह्मण नहीं है, उनको इस्लामिक किंग्स अपॉइंट करते थे, i.e. मजुमदार्स. Here to learn is saying Navavimarsh is also simultaneously live. You should divide your time zones because audience is the same. Teno is saying hello and goodbye. नवंबर के बाद आऊंगा, एग्जाम खत्म. Okay, best of luck, Teno. Yes, I see the beautiful culture of debate all over. Shastrarth. This phase of Indian administrative history led to the development of various prebends en masse. Above all, it led to the emergence of a stratum of landlords which developed out of tax farming and military prebendalization. The tax farmers and military prebendaries had to assume the administrative costs of their districts and to guarantee all military and financial contributions. If successful, these landlords had a free hand and little fear of intervention by central power. Their copyholds were as good as completely mediatized, annexed and appropriated. तो देखो भाई, recurring theme क्या है कि जब तुम जिस मोमेंट पे तुम किसी को गारंटीड नौकरी दे दोगे, गारंटीड स्टेटस दे दोगे, जिसका स्टेटस तुम फ्रीज कर दोगे और इनफैक्ट हेरिडिटरीली भी उनको करने को अलाउ कर दोगे, उसी मोमेंट पे कास्टिज्म, आई कास्ट बेस्ड बैड बिहेवियर का बर्थ हो जाएगा. तो जमींदारी प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, मतलब जमीन होना प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, बर्थ बेस्ड जमींदारी हमेशा रहना प्रॉब्लम है, विदाउट एनी रिपरकशन और मार्केट इंटरवेंशंस और डिस्ट्रप्शंस. तब जाके वो दलित को घोड़े पे नहीं चढ़ने देंगे वगैरह, ये सब चुतियापा शुरू हो जाएगा. हाँ, मैक्स पेपर नागपुर बोर्ड. A peculiar Indian development occurred in the elaboration of a whole series of graduated rents based upon the tax duties of the peasants and payable out of the produce of the land. Above the peasant proper, the actual cultivator of the land was one, or as a rule, a community of land renters who, as proprietors of the land, were held liable by the authorities for the tax levy. However, between these proprietors and the authorities, there was usually a middleman, the zamindar or talukdar, who laid claim either to a share of the rent in the northeast of 10% of the tax levy, or to again seigneurial rights, okay, royal rights, जो कि पहले personal rights होते थे, वो उनके royal rights बन जाते हैं, therefore more distortion, more misuse. So, listen to this again. Between these proprietors and the authorities, there was usually a middleman, टैक्स देने वाला और टैक्स लेने वाले में मिडिल मैन था, जमींदार या तालुकदार, जिनके तो डंडेबाज होते थे. They were probably the Lashkars. The Lashkar surname probably comes from there. And the Sheikhdars probably were also the same people who were the hired goons of the Zamindar. So, of the Zamindar and Talukdar, who laid claim either to a share. So, what's the middleman getting? The middleman is getting, the Zamindar or Talukdar is getting to either a share of the rent, which in the Northeast was of 10% of the tax levy, or he got seigneurial rights. Towards you saying, bye guys, disturbed you, sorry. No, we didn't get disturbed. The Northeast pattern resulted from the restriction of profits. Now, which region Max Weber calls Northeast, who knows? I don't know. The Northeast pattern resulted from the restriction of profits for this category of middleman tax farmers. Nice. The Northeast pattern resulted from the restriction of profits for this category of middleman tax farmers to a 10% quota of all tax income. This kind of regulation is also found in the Middle East. To complicate matters, at times, a new type of infeuded middleman developed beside the old, and these were invested by birth with rights to rent. Or again, there appeared landlords whose rights were based on the fact that they quote-unquote bought the village by assuming the obligation of paying tax arrears. Furthermore, क्या अजीब culture है हमारा. It's so funny almost. Interesting to say the least. Furthermore, भाई ये देखो, ये जो fight to the top है, fight to achievement, okay, the will to power है. This is what makes Hinduism a religion of the Chads, for the Chads, by the Chads. यहाँ पे कौन कितना गरीब है, कौन कितना लोअर कास्ट है, ये जो रेस टू द बॉटम हो गया है आज, ये है word for word literally what Nietzsche meant when he said slave morality. सक्सेसफुल लोगों का वे ऑफ थिंकिंग, वे ऑफ लाइफ, सब कुछ हम रिजेक्ट करेंगे क्योंकि हम अप्रेस्ड है, हम गरीब है, तो हमारा वे ऑफ थिंकिंग या हमारा वर्ल्ड व्यू करेक्ट है. और इसको डिफेंड कौन कर रहे हैं? इडियट अर्बन हिंदुत्ववादी बूमर्स सेइंग के रियल इंडिया लिव्स इन विलेजेस. फॉर व्हाट रीजन? सिर्फ और सिर्फ क्योंकि वो लोग अभी भी ठीक से पूजा पाठ करते हैं विद अ लॉट ऑफ श्रद्धा एंड भक्ति. This makes them qualified in everything. This gives them a bigger megaphone in all discourse and conversations. Meanwhile, it's a race to the bottom, pulling everyone down, pulling the entire country down. And the competition is going on in who can pull the society and country further down fastest before anyone else. I'll be more specific in what way. The discouragement of becoming extraordinary, okay, that's what we have been losing for about 100 years now. We will never have significant things, innovations, people, if this goes on, if slave morality goes on, because you are rejecting the way of life of the master. He's talking about Chhattisgarh when he says northeast, as Chhattisgarh is northeast to his hometown. Swamiji also said his aim is to make the Chandal Brahmin. Brahmin is ideal, yes. The poor must become richer. Richer होने के लिए capitalism, free market, financial literacy, ये सब चाहिए. पुअर को तुम आज 1 करोड़ रुपए दे दो, फ्रीबीज दे दो, फिर वो 5 दिन बाद फिर से पुअर हो जाएगा क्योंकि उसके पास वो टेक्निकल नो हाउ, बिहेवियरल नो हाउ, हैबिट्स कुछ नहीं है अमीर होने का. वो एडुकेशन और सिर्फ वो एडुकेशन भी गवर्नमेंट कैसे देगा? एटलीस्ट बोलो कि यस, ट्राई टू बिकम लाइक देम ब्रो. तो ये SC/ST एक्ट टेरिटरी में मैं घुस रहा हूँ, छोड़ दो. Dada, do you ever think that the struggle sometimes seems like a lost cause? Almost on every alternate day, because all over the world victim mentality. Yes, yeah, yes. And I am doing it knowing fully well that it's not fully well, but I think it's probably a lost cause. देखो अल्टीमेटली तो इरिपेयरेबल डैमेज का कोई चीज होता है ना, तो व्हाट इफ इरिपेयरेबल डैमेज हो चुका है, वी आर जस्ट पुटिंग अप अ लास्ट फाइट. वैसे टाइम इज साइक्लिकल, थिंग्स चेंज, थिंग्स rejuvenate, but if Hindu society rejuvenates, it might not happen in our lifetimes, and it might not happen in the same families, or even with the names and in the regions where you think Hindu society will survive. It might happen in a completely different wrapping. Hinduism will survive because, after all, it's Sanatan. Sanatan knowledge is Sanatan. It will not go away depending on the assholiness of commies or the idiocy of Hindutva socialists. But कुछ और ही लोग होंगे शायद ये कल्चर कैरी ऑन करने के लिए. इट्स प्रोबेबली अ लॉस्ट कॉज, इट्स प्रोबेबली इरेपरेबल डैमेज शायद हो गया है. Furthermore, hereditary village chiefs sometimes advanced rent claims, which gave them a kind of landlord character. Since the 18th century, the Marathas regime systematically carried out the quota allocation of tax yields to single prebendaries, which had precedence over the state, which retained the rest. In a fashion similar to the infeudation policy of the Normans, meaning the Vikings, they made certain that no prebendary received his income, not Vikings, okay? Normans meaning Christianity apnane ke baad ke Nordics. In a fashion similar to the infeudation policy of the Normans, they made certain that no prebendary received his income solely from his own bailiwick, but obtained at least part of his income from others. The special character of the social strata, resting on this economic basis, was determined by its origin and nature. The Occidental seigneury, like the Oriental Indian, developed through the disintegration of the central authority of the patrimonial state power, the disintegration of the Carolingian Empire in the Occident, the disintegration of the power of the caliphs and the Maharaja or great Mughals in India. In the Carolingian Empire, however, the new stratum developed on the basis of a rural subsistence economy. Through oath-bound vassalage, patterned after the war following, this stratum of lords was joined to the king and interposed itself between the freemen and the king. Feudal relations were also to be found in India, but they were not decisive for the formation either of a nobility or landlordism. Interesting argument. Okay. Feudal relations were to be found in India, but they were not decisive for the formation of the nobility, nor were they decisive for the formation of landlordism. Interesting argument. Might be wrong. In India, as in the Orient generally, a characteristic seigneury developed rather out of tax farming and the military and tax prebends of a far more bureaucratic state. The Oriental seigneury, therefore, remained in essence a prebend, I see, and did not become a fief, right? Not feudalization, but prebendalization of the patrimonial state occurred. Fuck. The difference is very subtle, very thin. एक minute. Just for the easy understanding of people, let's ask Google to give a difference between feudalism and prebendalization. Just so that we get 2-3 points. इसके लिए एक्चुअली चैट जीपीटी को पूछना चाहिए था. वैसे गूगल भी तो AI overall देता है. Feudalism is a land-based socio-political system centered on land ownership and reciprocal obligations, while prebendalism is the political use of public office for personal enrichment, often involving the distribution of state assets to maintain loyalty and power. Oh my god. So Trinamool is prebendalist. While feudalism is apparently, in this situation at least, a less evil sounding situation, often involving the distribution of state assets to maintain loyalty and power, differing in focus from feudalism's agrarian hierarchy. While feudalism grants land in exchange for military service or labor, या फिर ब्राह्मण्स को भी दिया जाता है. Think of a tenure position flat to a teacher, professor, etc. That is feudalism. Prebendalism, instead, treats public positions or state resources as personal income or a prebend to be distributed, leading to corruption and hindering democratic governance. Neon. Rene Girard would say, not Karl Marx. Jesus Christ was what you are describing for Karl Marx. This was a fascinating read today. Okay. So the Oriental seigneury therefore remained in essence a prebend and did not become a fief. Not feudalization, but prebendalization of the patrimonial state occurred. So the bad things have started happening now. The comparable, though undeveloped Occidental parallel, is not the medieval fief, but the purchase of offices and prebends during the papal cessiento or during the days of the French noblesse de robe. Right. The Indian bajas occasionally also sold tax and political prebends of all kinds. Not only were the historical stages of Indian and European developments different, but a purely military factor is important for the explanation of the different development of East and West. In Europe, the horseman was technically the paramount force of feudalism. In India, in spite of their numbers, horsemen were relatively less significant and efficient than the foot soldiers who had a primary role in the armies from Alexander to the Mughals. Population dynamics, weather, geography, सब कुछ तो factor in करना ही पड़ेगा. The chancery formalities of the great Mughal states, so far as they are known, are similar to those of the Turkish type and their models, the Caliphate and the Sassanid administrations. Caliph was the title of Muhammad's theocratic successors. The Sassanids, a dynasty of Persian kings, ruled from 226 to 641 AD. Even before the foreign dominations, an extraordinary rationalization of tax collection had led to the penetration of clerical techniques into every phase of political administration. The village scribe, who everywhere had a place alongside the village chief, was the lowest but nonetheless an important authority in this bureaucracy of scribes. The prebends of the scribes were contested by Brahmins and others. Okay, the prebends of the scribes were contested by Brahmins and others, by distinguished and parvenu castes alike. Parvenu meaning newly rich hue hai jo. The Marathas' rule was characterized by a consistent dualism of Deshmukh, district official, and Patel, village mayor. Both the Deshpandya and Kulkurmu, village calculators, also the Kulkarni surname, who stood beside them were usually Brahmins. वहां पे दोनों ही चल रहा था. कंपटीशन देशमुख और पटेल के बीच में, विलेज मेयर और डिस्ट्रिक्ट ऑफिशियल दोनों आर वाइंग फॉर द सेम जॉब. देश पांडे एंड कुलकर्णी again vying for the same job, but were all Brahmins, usually Brahmins. The content of the concept Kshatriya is unclear. Does it mean the families of petty kings or knighthood? This too must be explained in terms of the political structure of India, with its vacillation between fragmentation into innumerable petty kingdoms, originally simple chieftainships, and centralization into patrimonial empires. In military affairs, these opposed tendencies may be traced back to epic times, because even then, beside the combat forces, beside the combat of heroes, is to be found the beginnings of a disciplined army. Even at the time of Alexander's invasion, this disciplined army was not self-equipped, but equipped and supplied out of the king's magazines. The dualism between self-equipped warriors and disciplined soldiers, separated from ownership of the means of warfare, one of the most important historical contrasts, persisted and did not even completely disappear under the rule of the Mughals. Okay, this dualism, this difference between self-equipped warriors versus disciplined warriors, standing army, स्टैंडिंग आरपी पे इरफान हबीब रोमेला थप्पड़ का बहुत बढ़िया काम है, मैंने सुना है. The social prestige of self-equipped knights was always different from that of soldiers equipped by the king or a recruiting officer. However, the hiring of mercenaries from all sorts of half-barbarian tribes and the enfeoffment of the more deserving with land and prerogatives since the time of the Rajputs must have made status differences fluid. Fluid status differences. देखो फिर से नागपुरी मैक्स वेबर. Similarly, the vacillation of social structure and political organization created a fluid situation. Similarly, दो बार fluid use कर दिया दो consecutive sentences में. Similarly, the vacillation of social structure and political organization created a fluid situation. Fluid. When the tendency toward feudalization was ascendant, the king, as usual, made use of old distinguished secular or priestly nobles. When the tendency toward patrimonialism was ascendant, the king appointed lower class upstarts to positions of political power. देखो भाई, these are the reasons to be proud of India's Hindu heritage, Hindu history, because of these fascinating things. Now, one might argue there might be some similar examples everywhere, but hum kya kare? It's so long and fun and so juicy and so intelligent. Fluid situation का, डिसेंट्रलाइज लिबर्टेरियन सिचुएशन का जो एडवांटेज है वही हमको डायरेक्ट रिजल्ट यहाँ पे दिख रहा है. When the tendency toward feudalization अगर बढ़ता है तो राजा made use of old distinguished secular or priestly nobles. जब टेंडेंसी टुवर्ड पैट्रिमोनियलिज्म बढ़ रहा है, राजा अपॉइंटेड लोअर क्लास अपस्टार्ट्स टू पोजीशंस ऑफ पॉलिटिकल पावर. Why did he stop short of saying fluid caste system? Because he's not saying exactly, not discussing exactly that let's say that angle of caste. That's why. Otherwise, he has made it clear many times in the book already. Right-wing Hindutva fascist Max Weber defends caste system while sipping tea in Nagpur. Sipping tea in Germany. और भी खराब, हिटलर के देश से. Positions of political power. The strength of the noble elements, okay? क्या बढ़िया चीज है ये. The strength of the noble elements deriving from the ancient chieftainship and war following among the present-day Rajputs cannot be ascertained. Certainly, it is not great. During epochs when patrimonial bureaucratic tendencies were ascendant, tax farmers and office prebendaries were admitted and became landlords added en masse to the ranks of the old nobility. Furthermore, soldiers of fortune and mercenaries often, after a number of generations, laid claim to recognition as Kshatriyas, as do even today a number of half-Hinduized peasant tribes, which once provided these soldiers, like the Bhils. Since the end of mercenary warfare and the pacification of India, the peasant tribes have had to gain their livelihoods through peaceful pursuits. Certain tribes in the past had built up large empires through conquest. Since the disintegration of these empires and their conquest by the British, they have fallen into a peculiar interstitial situation between quote-unquote tribe and quote-unquote caste. Tribe है कि caste है, Max Weber को खुद समझ में नहीं आ रहा है. Which means it's fluid. To these in particular belong the Maratha, a tribe native to the northwest coast. The tribal name Maharatha, great warrior. अच्छा, महारथी से मराठा वर्ड आया है. Holy shit. ये मैक्स वेबर के बुक से समझने को आया. This is interesting. Maharatha, Maratha, Maratha. Marathi is therefore Maharathi. Holy shit. The tribal name Maratha, the great warrior, is to be found in inscriptions before our chronology. Huan Sang extols their chivalrous method of warfare. Holy shit. In his क्या ये सावरकर का बुक पढ़ रहा हूँ या मैक्स वेबर का? क्या चल रहा है यहाँ पे? अब तो नागपुरी ही बोलना पड़ेगा इसको. Fuck. I have to note this. Doesn't it sound like a Hindutva boomer WhatsApp forward? महाराथा से मराठा ट्राइब आया था. ह्यूमन सैंग को भी खींच लिया यहाँ पे. Yuan Sang extols their chivalrous method of warfare in his travel descriptions. Fuck. Even at that time, they fought rank and file, although a residue of heroic ecstasy appears in the intoxicated incitement of men and elephants before the battle. Kya bhasha hai? Under Islamic rule, this stratum's caste fiefs and service as soldier knights were continued, and eventually they rose in revolt against the great Mughals, establishing during the 18th century the last national Hindu regime in India. The nobles, or Asal, ASSAL, that is, former warriors, claimed Kshatriya rank, and a mixture with Rajput families had clearly taken place. Ritualistic and Sib organizations were established in essentially Hindu manner. Good, the Deshast Brahmins served as their priests. However, their tribal origin is betrayed in vestiges of the totemic organization, the Devak organization. The peasants, the Kunbi Maratha, are segregated by status barriers. Status barriers. The noble rank of such alien tribes of knights. The noble rank of such alien tribes of knights was questioned, and the claim advanced by tribal soldiers of fortune that they were Kshatriyas was never recognized. The status order of the South Indian Tamils at the time of the beginning of our chronology and their Hinduization was as follows. Only the immigrant Brahmins were designated as twice born because they alone wore the holy belt. They were followed by Tamil priests, Aryavars, ascetics, and noble landlords, the Ulavars, the lords of the waters, meaning irrigation, from whose ranks kings and political vassals were recruited. तो किंग्स और पॉलिटिकल वैसल्स रिक्रूट हो रहे हैं ऐसे कास्ट से जो कि बाद में बोलते थे हम तो अप्रेस्ड हैं. Following these were various castes of cattle breeders and artisans. Finally, as fifth estate, the Padaichia soldiers. Padaichia. Each stratum was segregated from the others. Later, Brahmanical classification placed the traders above the Vellalars, the old Ulavars. Change हो गया one fine morning. Ritual backdoor. Evolving with time. हर चीज में ये नहीं बोलने का है कि नहीं शास्त्र से said this 2000 years back. Or if you're rejecting shastras, then you have no relevance at all. ये लोग बार बार नया arguments, justifications कहाँ से ला रहे हैं, किस basis पे ला रहे हैं? Each stratum was segregated from the others. Later, Brahmanical classification placed the traders above the Vellalars, who were the old Ulavars, who in the meantime had become quote-unquote rusticated. Naturally, here as elsewhere, the Brahmins refused to class professional soldiers provisioned by the kings as twice-born castes. The Khati the Khati, I don't know how to pronounce it, Khati, may illustrate the fate of such ancient quote-unquote warrior tribes, actually often robbers and cattle thieves. They possessed strong castles in Sindh. Since their expulsion, they have settled in Ahmedabad, taking up occupations as landlords, talukdari, and peasants. They are sun worshippers. So, Mudra Sun Temple in लोगों का है क्या? Though utilizing Brahmins as priests with a centralized organization. Fuck. They are ancient warrior tribes who are actually robbers and cattle thieves. Fuck. Like old plebeian tribes of professional soldiers, they are they are relatively unstable in occupational pursuits. Right. The Khatris of Bombay, Kushal Mehra is Khatri, right? The Khatris of Bombay originally were a warrior caste claiming Kshatriya rank. Even today, they claim the right to the holy belt but have become cotton weavers. Oh, and he had a textile company. Interesting. So he broke his caste and has become a Brahman practically today. The old soldier and robber tribe of the Hailpaika of Bombay, since the fall of the Dravidian Empire, have become distillers of palm oil. So, Telis. The position of, I guess, Telis, right? Kushal is mostly from Kannada. Not true. He's Punjabi Khatri. Slevin, I don't know Shivaji Maharaja's action in this case, but as far as I remember, some descendant or probably Sambhaji Maharaj or Sambhaji Maharaj's son again had some problems with some Brahmins. and Maharashtrian Brahmins refused to declare him a Kshatriya, so he brought Brahmins from, I think, UP to declare him Kshatriya, and they came and did that. ये सब advantages है भाई decentralization का. Kannada is in the meme name of Canada. Oh, अच्छा. Kannada. Kannada, not Kannada. So it should be Knedda. The position of non-military office holders remained problematical. Pure tax farmers, zamindari, were recruited from various castes by the Mughals and secured no special caste rank of their own. Holy shit. Some of the old office prebendaries fared better insofar as lower ranking people at all, if at all, they obtained rank equivalent to the Brahmins or Rajputs. The type of administration determined which groups were able to advance. Right. Finally, of course, the rank and status ascent of the status ascent of the quiet, unmilitary bureaucratic scribes of the great kingdoms is contested to this very day. The patrimonial origin of the officialdom is expressed in the name Amatya, originally meaning house companion. Indian kings, at least, seem not to have employed unfree officials, as was done in the Middle East. The status pride of such free officials was expressed in the assumption that the official holds his position, quote unquote, through friendly agreement with his king and lord. Understanding hai Raja ji ke saath. Wow, wow. A formula found in an inscription for the empire of the Western Chalukya dynasty of the 12th to 13th centuries. The bulk of the officials, however, belonged to the Britya, including harem watchmen and poor soldier mercenaries. Wow, ये लोग भी अमात्य बनते थे. No, Neon. N एक होगा, D दो होगा, क्योंकि कनेडा है. In the course of time, only the social rank of the officials' claims of origin was changed. फिर से fluidity. Rishabh. In the course of time, only the social rank of the officials' claim of origin was changed. Patrimonialism broke the old monopoly of offices by the knighthood. The great kings, first of the Maurya, later of the Gupta dynasty, the first since the 4th century BC, the second since the 4th century AD, ruled the land by means of officials drawn from the Shudra castes. Brahmanical literature attributes this to the opening of the Kali epoch. शूद्राओं को ये सब नौकरी देने लगे मौर्याज और गुप्ताज, तो कलयुग आ गया. It corresponds, however, to the nature of patrimonial states everywhere, and particularly to Oriental patriarchalism. Max Weber. Holy shit. ये क्या पढ़ लिया हमने आज. तो ये क्षत्रिय वाला जगह खत्म करके ही आज डिस्कशन खत्म करेंगे. उसके बाद एक बढ़िया वीडियो देखेंगे ऑन द डिस्कशन ऑफ स्लेव मॉरलिटी वर्सेस मास्टर मॉरलिटी अकॉर्डिंग टू नीचे. ओके, वैश्याज अगले दिन डिस्कस करेंगे. मगर ये क्या बोला यहाँ पे. फक. द ग्रेट किंग्स, फर्स्ट द मौर्याज who ruled since 4th century BC, later the Gupta dynasty who ruled from 4th century AD, ruled the land by means of officials drawn from the Shudra castes. Shudras as government officials. Jai Bhim. Brahmanical literature attributes this to the opening of the Kali epoch. It corresponds, however, to the natural nature of patrimonial states everywhere, and particularly to Oriental patriarchalism. उस समय भी reservations दे दिया. Slevin had one important point. Shivaji Maharaj also brought Gaga Bhatt from UP for his coronation, as local Brahmins refused. Gaga Bhatt was part of a branch of Marathi Brahmins who were living in UP. Also, yes, Shahu Maharaj had a problem. Yeah, I keep forgetting his name. He's the one who did a lot of work for Dalits and gave them reservations in Kolhapur estate. Oh my God. इसीलिए महाराष्ट्र का एंटी कास्ट मूवमेंट्स का ट्रैजेक्टरी पूरा अलग है बंगाल से. ये सब बंगाल में कभी नहीं हुआ भाई. फिर से लोग बोलेंगे हाँ चैतन्य महाप्रभु ने किया था, वो एक एग्जांपल देके क्या होगा, और फिर सीधा जोगेंद्रनाथ मंडल का चुतियापा. मगर महाराष्ट्र में जैसे हुआ वो वैसे बंगाल में नहीं हुआ कभी. There were Shudra kings too, like Kakatiyas or Nayakas. Even Raja Radhakanta Dev was officially Shudra. Oh my God. But Shudip, that might be because, specifically the Radhakanta Dev example, might be because Bengali Brahmins declared no, that everyone other than us are Shudras. In Bengal, Kshatriyas, Kayasthas, everyone were technically Shudras. तो वो तो फेक शूद्रा हुआ. ये तो एक्चुअल शूद्रा का बात हो रहा है. Surely the old Kshatriya caste had considered enfeoffment with political power its special monopoly. The caste was not able to retain its monopoly, however, and indeed it helped work the decomposition of the caste. The patrimonial state utilized as officials not only Brahmins but scribes of other castes. Without binding itself to any single status group, the state bestowed prebends, including tax collection on civil tax farmers, army recruitment on condottieri, in the form of the Jagirdar, Talukdar, and Zamindar. The state created tax prebendaries of all sorts and endowed them with political power. The state freed itself from dependence on any single stratum. In fact, the kings themselves were often merely fortunate Peruvians, Peronas. इसका मीनिंग देख के तुमको बताते हैं. I know what it means, but I won't be able to explain it in English. ये टाइपो ही है. He meant parvenus. In fact, the kings themselves were often merely fortunate parvenus. And remember, again, the 1997 heroic paper by Irfan Habib, there he mentions this very thing. Remember, he says that the casteism in the end was such that it only rewarded usurpers. जो king इस मोमेंट पे है उसके लिए कास्ट इज नॉट रियली वर्किंग. जो नया बंदा आएगा उसको हटा देगा, उसके लिए कास्ट सिस्टम बेटर वर्क करता है. Rishabh, thank you for the contribution to West Bengal's GDP. I've heard from some places that the Mauryas themselves were Shudras. Yeah, I've heard many claims like that. Not sure how true that is. Explains a lot about Ashoka. वो अपने ज़माने का गवाही था. Yeah, people say they were Shudras. Now, I don't think there's any dispute that they were Shudras. There is a dispute of whether Chandragupta Maurya was a slave or just a child labor. उस पे डिबेट है, मगर हाई कास्ट तो नहीं थे बिल्कुल ही. The person who inaugurated Ram Mandir, Giri Maharaj, is descendant of Gaga Bhatt. Oh my God. So, in fact, the kings themselves were often merely fortunate parvenus, meaning newly rich. Monarchs appeared who described themselves as the sprouts of Brahmins' feet, hence as Shudras. ये देखो, शुदीप जो बोल रहा था वो भी मैक्स वेबर ने कंफर्म कर दिया कि Shudra monarchs who described themselves as the sprouts of Brahmins' feet. Okay, Boshali is saying Chandragupta Maurya's family came from a family of peacock maintenance. अच्छा, तो Shudra ही तो हुआ. According to strict theory, not even royal descent could make a nobleman out of a Shudra. Recently, the Rajbangshi caste in Bengal excommunicated a member because he had given his daughter in marriage to a member of a caste of cooks who had Raja ancestor, who had a Raja ancestor. कि देखो किसका किसका धोती खोल रहा है. लोअर कास्ट राजवंशी एक लड़की के बाप को एक्सकम्युनिकेट करता है क्योंकि उसने अपने बेटी का शादी करवा दिया एक राजा के डिसेंडेंट से. मीनवाइल खुद का नाम है राजवंशी, राजवंश. बट वो ठीक है क्योंकि उन लोगों का मानना है हम राजा तो है मगर लोअर कास्ट ही है, लोअर कास्ट ही रहेंगे माँ कसम. और हम राजा के एंसेस्टर्स के, राजा के डिसेंडेंट्स के साथ शादी ब्याह भी नहीं करने देंगे. কাস্ট টাইপ ইন্টারমিডিয়েট, ইয়েস সুদীপ, ইয়েস. সপ্তর্ষি সিং ওরা তো ফার্মার ছিল. কারা সপ্তর্ষি? চন্দ্রগুপ্ত মৌর্য? নো নো. Farmer, although farmer and peacock breeder is kind of adjacent. So recently the Rajbangshi caste in Bengal excommunicated a member because he had given his daughter in marriage to a member of a caste of cooks who had a Raja ancestor. As a rule, political authority is a preponderant advantage in the competition for rank. Hence, today, unmilitary office nobles compete for caste rank with the Rajputs and military nobles generally. This is particularly true of the great caste of scribes, as, for example, the purely bureaucratic caste in Bengal and the semi-bureaucratic military prebendaries, the Prabhu, a small group only found in Bombay. The Prabhu were once a military class. अरे बाप रे, ये भी military class था. The Prabhu were once a military class enfeoffed since the rule of the Gupta, with local administrative duties, tax collection, documents and records, military administration. They have retained their position for a very long time. In Bengal, there were only a few rural Rajput families. Bengal mein rural Rajput family aaya ka? He probably means Kshatriya, right? Not Rajput in the sense of Rajasthani. Only one of the well-known families appears to belong to them without doubt. Only one of the well-known families appears to belong to them without doubt. कौन family का बात कर रहा है मैक्स वेबर 1914 में बैठ के, not 1924? Does anybody know of this? Bengali Rajput? Oh, Slevin Prabhu, I see. Only one of the, in Bengal there were only a few rural Rajput families. Khetri. Only one of the well-known families appears to belong to them without doubt. Since the Sena dynasty, the territory of Bengal has been organized in patrimonial bureaucratic fashion. The caste, a caste of scribes also appearing in other regions, were still viewed as pure Shudras in the Vellala Charita. Now the caste in Bengal claim to be Kshatriyas of a higher rank than Rajputs. ये जो claim कर सकते हैं, this is the proof that caste was fluid. आज का जो आज के डिसेंडेंट है कोई भी कास्ट में, उनके एंसेस्टर्स उस कास्ट में नेसेसरीली नहीं थे 100-200 साल पहले. Yes, Rajput, Durgesh Nandini and the Tagore novel on Tripura have Bengali Rajput characters. Ki bolchish? Fuck. Plus some Rajput settlers from Todarmal and Mansingh's campaigns. My fuck. The occupational composition of these castes of officials with literary education differs greatly from the Rajputs and other old soldier castes, who show an especially high rate of illiteracy. At present, very few Rajputs are found in modern political and private economic administration in which Brahmins and scribes play an important role. Brahman gar caste to sabar chakri খেয়ে নিয়েছে already. The same holds for advocacy, the press, and the quote-unquote learned professions. BBK এসে গেছে. In Calcutta, 30% of the castes are clerks. The Brahmins and Kayastha vie for the first place among the clerks, lawyers, doctors, journalists, and engineers. And doctors are usually Vaidyas. In Bombay province, 74% of the Rajputs and 92% of the Marathas are engaged in agriculture. But only 2% and 0.3% respectively are to be found in political administration, and 0.8% and 0.02% respectively in learned professions. The Rajputs and Marathas. Holy shit. That is about the same percentage as the despised peasant caste of the Kuli in Gujarat. This is probably a typing mistake. It's supposed to be Koli, right? Koli. कूली KULI नाम का कोई peasant caste है क्या गुजरात में? There 7% of the Brahmins and 27% of the Prabhus are engaged in administration, and 22 and 18% respectively in the learned professions. Recruits for administration and learned professions are also drawn from the trading caste of the Lohars with 5 to 8 tenth percent and 27% respectively. Only rarely does a Rajput become a shopkeeper. A Maratha almost never. To this day, और अब इसलिए रिजर्वेशन मांगना पड़ रहा है. To this day, the Maratha caste stands for love of feudal pomp and leisure. The caste rank of the castes is constantly and passionately contested, particularly by the old Bengal doctor's caste, the Boiddo, which claims higher rank because it practices the full Upanayan ceremony and feels entitled to read the Vedas. Inter-BBK quarrels, guys. The caste, for their part, insists that the Boiddo surreptitiously obtained the right to wear the holy belt only 100 years ago through the help of bribed Brahmins. मैक्स वेबर पॉपकॉर्न लेके बैठा ये सब रिसर्च करने के लिए. और क्या बाकी रह गया? सी एवरीवन इज मोर और लेस हरामी इन द एंड. तो निज्जा है सत्य. मानो या ना मानो, सामने बोलो या ना बोलो, निज्जाism is the truth, is reality. This was a hilarious section. I'll read it again. The caste rank of the caste is constantly and passionately contested, particularly meaning challenged, particularly by the old Bengal doctor's caste, the Boiddo, which claims higher rank because it practices the full Upanayan ceremony and feels entitled to read the Vedas. The caste, for their part, insists that the Boiddo surreptitiously obtained the right to wear holy belt only 100 years ago through the help of bribed Brahmins. And actually, both are right. Both parties may well be historically right. Oh shit, I just said it. Fuck. By reading Hitesh Ranjan Shanal has helped. Max Weber wrote the exact sentence which I just said without reading that sentence. Fuck. This is a fun day. Who knew sociology could cheer you up? Let's see this comment. 2018 murder of Kevin Joseph, a Dalit Christian man, was murdered. It was an honor killing. Kevin was abducted by an armed gang allegedly hired by Ninu Chako, a family members. They were an upper caste Syrian Christian family. अपर कास्ट सीरियन क्रिश्चियन कैसे बना? अच्छा, मैरिज बैलेंस हुआ होगा. The caste undoubtedly were Shudras. On the other hand, despite the great age of medicine as a special science in India, the physicians' castes at best could have had Vaishya rank like other castes of the old guild association, Mahajan, because they are self-employed entrepreneurs. Today, the Boiddos and similar castes in other regions often claim higher rank than the Rajputs because the Rajputs do not consider it absolutely degrading under certain circumstances to lay a hand on the plow. The Boiddo can back their own rank claims by pointing to the fact that the Sena dynasty developed out of their caste. क्या justification है? देखो, मास्टर मॉडलिटी चल रहा था ना तब, सब मैं ऊपर हूं, मैं हायर रैंक हूं, वो इंसेंटिव था. आज रिजर्वेशन के चक्कर में सब लोग बोल रहे हैं नहीं मैं अप्रेस्ड हूं, नहीं मैं ज्यादा अप्रेस्ड हूं, नहीं मैं लोअर कास्ट हूं. All in all, the present castes recognized as having more or less undisputed Kshatriya rank are quite mixed in character and bear the traces of the historical changes which Hinduism has undergone politically since the rise of clerical administration. Even more problematic was and is the situation of the third caste of classical teaching, the Vaishya, जो हम अगले दिन पढ़ेंगे. अब देखते हैं मेरे कास्ट में क्या क्या अजीबोगरीब चुतियापा निकलता है. This will be fun. Now we are going to look at a video from one of my favorite philosophy discussion channels, a young guy, way younger than me. The channel is called Unsolicited Advice. We are going to check out a short discussion on Nietzsche's idea of slave morality versus master morality. This was a hilarious discussion. Syrian Christian community, I think, is historically converted Brahmins. If that happened, I do not know of it. It may be so, but it should not have happened ideally, because Syrian Christians were running away from the Roman Empire and were getting refuge here. Why would Brahmins get married to them? They weren't even doing conversions and stuff. Ki holo re? My dog hurts himself while trying to scratch his ears. What a weird stray dog. I found out yesterday, I realized yesterday that my stray dog was actually abused when he was on the streets and abandoned by 2 families before me. Yesterday, I, for the first time, tried to play with him with a ball. Other times he plays with other stuff. Every time he could not understand the concept, ran away, and actually thought I was throwing something at him. And a long branch of some tree flew into our terrace, and I was trying to have fun with him, showing it to him as a sort of a fake bone that I can throw, and he will chase it and stuff. He immediately got very scared and ran away every time I did that. Some of them may have done some political shenanigans to claim themselves to be Brahmins, या फिर पूरा की पूरा ही झूठी बोल रहे हैं to come across as respectable families in Kerala. But Syrian Christians are called Syrian Christians for a reason. They are Marthoma Christians. They are Saint Thomas Christians who are running away from the Roman Empire. And by the way, we are discussing Max Weber, and my dog is called Max Weber. Max, এদিকে আসো, Max আসো, তোমাকে নিয়ে আলোচনা হচ্ছিল, তোমার বই পড়লাম আজকে সব। তো and when the Portuguese came, they could not understand. I've told this story in my live streams many times. They did atrocities against them, burned their books. Vasco da Gama decided, no, these guys are fake Christians. What kind of a Christianity is this? What kind of even a cross is this? We have never seen this. Catholicism is the main Christianity, etc. They integrated into the caste system. I see. Okay, now let's get to the video. Oh, Slevin is saying my so-called higher caste is OBC, as during Shiv Sena rule in 99, we got in the system and got ourselves reservations. Caste is too small, so nobody noticed. Genius, Slevin, genius. So many Shahas did it. Some Haldars did it in Kolkata. I know Haldars from rich elite, landowning families from Bangladesh. I know SC Haldars. So many Bangal Shahas also got reservations. We didn't. If I had an OBC certification, all my attackers would be in jail today, because except each and every one of them were BBK. If only my ancestors were that opportunistic and actually that Nietzschean. Okay, guys, wait for it. Unsolicited advice, Nietzsche. हाँ, सबटाइटल है, बढ़िया है, आराम से समझ में आएगा. थोड़ा वॉल्यूम लो है, ठीक है? तुम्हारे गैजेट से सब लोग वॉल्यूम बढ़ा दो. वेट. So we are looking at this video to essentially diagnose the predicament of Hindu society. You'll see where we are going wrong for a lot of decades now.
What if everything you knew about right and wrong, good and evil, just and unjust, what if it was all wrong? This was the radical thought proposed by German philosopher and reason I had a terrible moustache for a year, Friedrich Nietzsche. He was one of the first philosophers to look at our moral system with its value on sympathy, kindness, selflessness and altruism, and say that this is not only arbitrary, but actually undesirable. It is this that has earned him his reputation as the philosopher par excellence for edgy teenage boys rebelling against their parents. But rarely do we stop to consider just how radical his view on morality is, and how it turned the world of philosophy inside out. In this video, we'll learn why Nietzsche hated Christian morals, how being a good person can make you miserable, and why so-called moral people are secretly liars. But first, let's learn exactly how Nietzsche thought our current moral system came about. 1. Nietzsche's history of morality. In the Peter Schaffer play, Amadeus,
Disclaimer again, smoking is injurious to health, guys. Smoking causes cancer. Do not smoke at all.
the composer Salieri develops an obsession and an envy of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Whereas Salieri had to work hard to become a successful composer, Mozart writes far greater music than he ever did, seemingly with no effort. Enraged and resentful, Salieri sets out to ruin Mozart, tarnish his career, and eventually murder him with poison. Since the play's premiere, Salieri has become a near-universal symbol of the destructive power of resentment. Salieri gains no joy in his vengeance. His resentment ultimately destroys him just as much as it destroys Mozart, because it was not aimed towards becoming better. It was aimed at bringing Mozart down to his level. His life's mission was not the best.
Did you see? Yeah, Shudeep, that's not the point. I know you are just pointing it out. Arey, mic kahan pe rakh diya? Excitement mein. Did you see, guys? This is what I'm talking about. The race to the bottom, which results from slave morality. Okay? He doesn't want to become better. He wants the better guy to become as bad or worse than him in qualification, in achievements, in wealth, etc. Isn't this the classic case of socialism? Isn't this what we are dealing with in India daily? See, this is slave morality.
Betterment of himself, but the constraint of others. On Nietzsche's view, our entire moral system was constructed by resentful people just like Salieri. He paints a picture of history that is somewhat fictional, but is meant to chart the general course of the creation of a moral system. Initially, when man is just beginning to form tribes and societies, the most powerful people rise to the top, and it is they who get to decide what is good. And they don't have a hard time deciding. They immediately define good as all the qualities that they possess. That is, strength, competence, and the ability to dominate. Nietzsche is quick to emphasize that this is not all crude individualistic hedonism. With strength and competence comes the ability to be dependable and useful. And with the ability to dominate also comes the ability to protect and provide, both for oneself and for one's fellows. At this point, it is not selflessness or altruism, and certainly not weakness, that is desirable. It is
Remember, therefore, the Voltaire quote, which is famous for being used by Spider-Man, with great powers come great responsibility. That is the commie way of looking at it. The truth is, with great responsibilities come great power. Kamil is saying, you are casteist. Hope I made it clear. Oh, how did you make it clear? But this murder of Dalit Christian happened in 2018 and no kings ruled at that time. So what I'm trying to say is casteism is there among these Christians also who come after Brahmins. तो क्रिश्चियंस में कास्टिज्म है तो हम कास्टिस्ट हैं.
instead personal excellence. This is what Nietzsche refers to as individualistic hedonism. With strength and competence comes the ability to be dependable and useful. And with the ability to dominate also comes the ability to protect and provide, both for oneself and for one's fellows. At this point, it is not selflessness or altruism, and certainly not weakness, that is desirable. It is instead personal excellence. This is what Nietzsche refers to as noble morality, or master morality. For Nietzsche, the morality's defining characteristic is that it is constructive. It starts by defining good practically out of nothing. It also has a concept of bad, but only in the sense of a lack of the qualities that are considered good. It is almost like an afterthought. This is why Nietzsche thought this type of morality was life-affirming. It gave people something to strive towards. It was active, energetic, and strengthened people's wills. On a wider scale, it led to successful societies who were able to conquer rivals, subjugating them and ensuring the prosperity of their own civilization. But with conquering and the will to dominate others, inevitably emerges some form of caste system. There are the conquerors and the conquered, the powerful and the
Part of caste system, huh? Or caste is inherently Hindu.
powerless, or as Nietzsche puts it, the master and the slave. And just as there is master morality, over time there will emerge slave morality. The subjugated class will not put up with their treatment forever. It will cause them to resent their dominators. As a result, anything the master morality deems good, the slave morality will consider to be evil. Where the aristocrat values strength, the serf will value weakness. Where the master values a will to dominate, the slave will value submission and obedience. And where the nobleman values the ability to do great deeds both for good and for ill, the servant will instead value harmlessness. Nietzsche thought that all of this was perfectly understandable. Servant. And where the nobleman values the ability to do great deeds both for good and for ill, the servant will instead value harmlessness. Nietzsche thought that all of this was...
So you see, the good boys that Hindus usually raise, who are great employees and CEOs and stuff, who always cower down in front of white people, in front of direct, overt, loud, physically threatening racism. That's the good parenting that Sanatan AC temperaturists glorify, saying that this is dharmic parenting. तुम्हारा धर्म का definition, Hinduism का definition सब गलत जगह से आ रहा है, and you don't know what real Hinduism is.
Perfectly understandable. After all, if you've been dominated, you know how unpleasant it feels, and you're going to find it very difficult to value domination. But Nietzsche points out a fundamental difference between this slave morality and the former master morality. Whereas the powerful defined good out of nothing and only then moved on to define bad in opposition to that, the starting point of the morality of the powerless is to demonize anything that the powerful have. There is no aspiration here at all, apart from to weakness and incompetence, at least according to Nietzsche. And for Nietzsche, this slave morality found its pinnacle in Christianity. All the Christian values, helping others, loving your enemies, praying for the souls of your tormentors, the idea of the meek inheriting the earth, all of it is aimed at demonizing strength and domination in favor of passivity and submission. It is the quintessential example of a slave morality, and Nietzsche points out that it has overcome the whole of Europe and beyond. A key concept to introduce here is the will to power. Nietzsche thought that every human had in them a will to dominate other people and their environment, to enforce their will on the universe, to change things and reshape the world as they would want it. It is this will that makes the powerful want to dominate the powerless, and it is the same instinct that makes the powerless take their revenge by slowly switching the values of society. So to recap, Nietzsche thought that our current moral system was brought about, in effect, by a resentful revolt, where the subjugated had their revenge on their dominators by slowly morphing the values of society so the highest good was no longer defined by the powerful, but by the powerless. It's a strange picture to get your head round. Now, you might say, but so what? Should we not encourage altruism, selflessness, and helping other people? And Nietzsche would say this is a fair question. But he says there are huge problems with making these our universal moral concepts. And that is what we shall move on to next. And if you want more on philosophy and the art of learning, subscribe to my email list. The link is in the description. 2. The consequences of mediocrity. In Dostoevsky's Notes from the Underground, it tells the tale of a man whose life has been torn apart by passivity and mediocrity. He makes endless promises to himself about everything from great deeds he will commit to evil acts he will undertake. What he actually wishes is besides the point. What's important is what happens next, which is nothing. He does not act, and he does not attempt to change the world in any way. It would not matter whether the man from the underground was the evilest creature in history or the kindest soul to walk the earth. He is ineffectual, so it simply does not matter either way. He has no will, no strength, and no ability to make things happen. And this is what Nietzsche is worried will happen to us if we throw ourselves wholeheartedly into slave morality. According to Nietzsche, the two factors that drive slave morality are resentment and fear of strength. We will discuss resentment later, but for now, let's focus on this intense fear of the powerful, and even of power itself. Nietzsche points out the profound and the obvious, that in order to achieve anything, you need to be powerful. Any person who has done anything of significance, by necessity, had to have extreme strength or extreme competence, or both, unless they changed the face of the world by complete accident. This is true for the generous philanthropist who uses their great resources to help others, and the imperialist general who uses the same resources to subjugate millions. The point for Nietzsche is you cannot have one without the other. You cannot create extraordinary men without creating extraordinary monsters. Sometimes they might even come in the same package. Famously, Nietzsche described Napoleon as a great mix of monster and superior man. For Nietzsche, a fear of power is only going to suppress those people who are able to rise above the rest and become extraordinary. If Napoleon had adopted the belief that it was better to be powerless and meek than powerful and strong, then he would have never changed the face of Europe forever. According to...
Here to Learn is saying, Padipalaya Durbalam, or socialism, Sarvesham Sarvesham Samam Charam, equality. Vidhi Dharmam Varam, Ram Rajya Vasitvam. Hindutva socialists find this in Ram Rajya Shlok. Amish's Ram book opens with this shlok. Acha.
To Nietzsche, the moment we fear power, we are working against ourselves, our societies, and the overall success of the species. At the beginning of the genealogy of morals, Nietzsche says he is going to put aspects of our morality to the test to see if they promote greater utility and prosperity, both to the individual and to the society they belong to. For Nietzsche, the fear of power fails on both counts. In the case of the individual, it means that only those who have no vision will end up happy or fulfilled. And in the case of society, it means it will never produce people able to make great leaps forward for the sake of their community. Had Napoleon just been a bit more skilled, he might have conquered.
This is what I was talking about in the previous live stream as well. This is why we will be a flailing country society unless we change this, of course. And this is going to be a radical conversation. This is going to be a radical change. And people who are the first through the gates to talk about this will get hanged metaphorically in public, metaphorically. But someone has to do it, and someday it will have to change. Otherwise, there's going to be no India worth saving. Here to learn. Yeah, by today's feminism standards, yes.
The whole of Europe, and I would be speaking French right now. Nietzsche asks us whether Napoleon would have succeeded had France not been inculcated with centuries of Christian values. So Nietzsche encourages us to let go of our fear of power. If we do not, then we are dooming both ourselves and our societies to insignificance. It is only a matter of time. But perhaps this strikes you as a little bit speculative. I must say that it seems a bit of a stretch to me at points. Outwardly, Christians have been some of the most successful and powerful in history, although Nietzsche would say that that is only because they had not yet completely embraced slave morality. However,
and because they are hypocrites, just like the powerful socialist politicians. That's what I'm saying. Today's society is a society for the slave, of the slave, but not by the slave. जो ऊपर बैठा है वो नित्य नहीं है, उसको असली खेल पता है, वो बाकियों को भाषणबाजी देके ये सब करवा रहा है, मगर देश उससे नहीं चलेगा.
Nietzsche makes a further critical argument. Slave morality will make us miserable. 3. Resentment, self-destruction, and morality. I talked a little bit earlier about the idea of our system of values coming from the powerless resenting the powerful. But for Nietzsche, building anything on a foundation of resentment like this is complete disaster. This is because it alienates us from the very thing we want to become and makes us miserable as a result. This is all
the story of Hindutva 1.0, Christianity, not Christian, probably, definitely, I guess, communism, socialism mainly, wokeism.
A bit abstract. So let's bring it down to earth with a story often used to illustrate this point. Aesop's fable of the sour grapes. Aesop tells of a fox who is jumping to get some grapes that hang off a nearby tree. Having failed to catch them a number of times, the fox gives up and remarks that the grapes were probably sour anyway. This soothes the fox in the moment, but fundamentally, it dooms him to never getting the grapes. If another fox were to come along and somehow manage to catch the grapes, our hero would become resentful. He would on the one hand still desire the grapes, but on the other hand, he is demonizing the grapes as not worth having. This contradiction will eat him up inside as long as he continues to deny his will to grapes. Now replace grapes with something much more significant, like power or achievement or influence.
So, फूको बढ़िया है, power को hate करना बढ़िया है, मगर जिस moment पे power मिल जाएगा, उस moment पे हम OBC shopkeeper को जाके बोलेंगे कि जय श्री राम का है बोला, जय भीम का है नहीं बोला.
These are things Nietzsche thinks all people want to a greater or lesser degree, but they're also the very things condemned by slave morality. The trouble is, just saying they're evil is not enough to get people to stop wanting them. For Nietzsche, it is basically impossible to stop wanting them because they stem from the base human instinct aligned at preserving and bettering our lives, the will to power. Far from actually stemming the urge, the person living under slave morality is told that a fundamental and unchangeable part of themselves is evil and that they are reprehensible for having it. This may stop them from following their will to power, but it will also torture them inside. It will create generations of miserable, self-hating people who have had their aspirations to greatness crushed. It condemns us both to despair and to mediocrity. And when we are living our mediocre lives, we will look at those whose will to power has not been suppressed, who are out in the world achieving great things or just trying to achieve great things, and we will be deeply resentful. We will look at those more powerful or successful than us and tell ourselves that they must be evil, or that what they have is not worth our time. We will tell those struggling to fulfill their potential as human beings that they are wasting their lives and that they will never get anywhere. Who knows? Maybe in both cases we'll be right. But whether right or wrong, we will continue to say it because the alternative is deeply painful. But we once had the potential to strive for greater things in life, but now this has passed, and we are condemned to live out the same monotonous days until we die an unfulfilled death. For Nietzsche, a substantial critique of our current moral system is that it does not do what it proclaims to do. Being good is meant to be useful and life-fulfilling.
Exactly.
But in Nietzsche's analysis, being meek, mild, passive and selfless does none of those things. All it does is condemn us to a life of constant frustration as we deny our will to power. It is, in his view, a deeply dishonest way to live. And that is exactly what we're going to move on to next. 4. The moral man. We all know someone who, through their moral system, has become completely insufferable. The kind of person who will lecture you over dinner and hold everyone around them to impossible moral standards that they have not agreed to. They display no interest in constructing their own novel ideas, but are largely occupied with condemning the people around them for various sins, especially those who have more joyful lives than they do. This is Nietzsche's idea of the moral person, who he invokes at various points, both in Beyond Good and Evil and The Genealogy of Morals. From one perspective, they're doing something perfectly unobjectionable. They're simply upholding the values of their moral system. But Nietzsche does not buy this story in the slightest. He charges the moral person with a fundamental dishonesty about their motivations.
Yes.
Righteous anger is a familiar concept. It's essentially when someone gets angry and attempts to change another person's behavior, but from a moral standpoint. This sort of anger has motivated everything from the expansion of human rights to the massacring of different religious denominations. Looking at it as a historical phenomenon, Nietzsche notes that it is basically an
ह्यूमन राइट्स और मैसेकरिंग ऑफ डिफरेंट रिलीजियंस को इक्वेट कर दिया नीचे की वजह से इस लड़के ने
standpoint. This sort of anger has motivated everything from the expansion of human rights to the massacring of different religious denominations. Looking at it as a historical phenomenon, Nietzsche notes that it is basically an amoral force. It is simply one group of people attempting to enforce their morality on others. In other words, it is the angry person's expression of their will to power. And it is important to note that Nietzsche doesn't see anything inherently wrong with this. He thinks it is only natural to want to assert your will against others. He would not judge any of these people for their wish to change the world to better themselves and people like them. He merely points out that far from being a crusade for metaphysical truth or justice, all it is the will to power with a good PR campaign. But the trouble with this dishonesty is that it fundamentally limits the will to power. It means we can only assert our will when we come up with some theoretical justification for it. And if we're stuck in slave morality, these constraints will be very tight indeed. Again, Nietzsche points out the stifling effect of morality on those he considered exceptional. The very thing that made Napoleon great in the eyes of Nietzsche was his assertion of his will to power despite having no moral justification for wanting to conquer the whole of Europe. It was his ability to act beyond good and evil that set him apart from the rest. If he had instead spent his time wringing his hands over whether he was acting morally, he would have never made his mark on history. And this is part of what makes reading Nietzsche on morality so difficult. It is hard to overstate just how radical a departure this is from previous philosophical analyses of good. Whereas Aristotle, John Stuart Mill and Kant all asked what good was in and of itself, Nietzsche treats morality as a set of concepts humans use and simply describes it, highlighting the elements where it may work against us rather than for us. Whereas philosophy has tended to ask, what is good? Nietzsche asks, what is good for? But there is one question we must all now ask ourselves. What do we do with Nietzsche's analysis? 5. What next? Nietzsche's analysis of morality is one of the most controversial theses in philosophy. It is anti-democratic, anti-egalitarian, and stands against almost everything we intuitively consider good. And this is by design. But what can we do with this information? Are we to abandon our old values and forge new ones that prioritize strength, will, and domination? Well, that is what some people take from it. But if you don't want to go that far, and not many people do, there is still brilliant insight to be found in Nietzsche's thoughts here. Firstly, it shows how strength and power do not need to be bad things. The ability to be a great benefactor to humanity goes hand in hand with the ability to do great harm. A morality that glorifies weakness and meekness to the
Yeah, this is what I was telling to Abhay Agarwal one day. He was bringing up many counter arguments to the idea of noble morality versus slave morality, and I kept on saying that it is always going to be a double-edged sword.
Exclusion of self-betterment and competence is doing a disservice to its followers by actively making their lives worse. Secondly, it suggests that we should perhaps be a little more skeptical of those who build their identity around being moral. Nietzsche's observation that professions of goodness can cloak a hidden will to power is a wonderful piece of cynical wisdom. Bewaring the person who wields morality like a knife is pretty good advice for our interpersonal lives. And lastly, and most importantly, it shows that we should not take our fundamental concepts for granted as if they were above criticism. Good and evil, truth and falsity, appearance and reality. These are not holy relics beyond critique. We can question them, interrogate them, and see if they're doing the job we want them to do. We don't have to outright abandon them, but we may want to alter them slightly for the betterment of ourselves and our societies. Nietzsche, more than any other Western philosopher before him, reminds us of our freedom to choose our values. The subtitle of Nietzsche's book Twilight of the Idols is How to Philosophize with a Hammer. And this sums up Nietzsche's approach wonderfully. Nietzsche is destroying the old philosophical assumptions that goodness and evil exist, or even that goodness is good. And he makes way for a new type of philosopher. One that will brush away the smashed fragments of these old systems and create new ones. Ones that encourage an engagement with the world that is powerful, active, loving, and above all, life-affirming. I do encourage you to read Nietzsche for yourself to get your own insights here, as I've had to skip over much of the detail.
Yeah, that is one of the key arguments of Nietzsche, that it's life-affirming. The opposite is not life-affirming. Hence, TFR also going down, literally.
The two key texts to pick up for this aspect of his philosophy are Beyond Good and Evil and The Genealogy of Morals. And if you want some more constructive Nietzschean philosophy, then click here to learn about his radical doctrine of loving one's fate, no matter what happens. And stick around for more on thinking to
Yeah, Sudeep, he is creating the old one in a new cloak only because this guy's definition of old is different from our definition of old. Yes, and when this guy says old, he means, again, John Stuart Mill to Aristotle. Aristotle did not defend slave morality, but at least thought on the same lines as the people who later said, defended, justified, or argued in favor of slave morality. But Nietzsche was not even asking those questions. And our old is different from his old. Barbarika is saying it would be interesting to understand how the idea of power got dissociated from the idea of protection. Because the powerless got too much voice. And when they got voice, they should have realized that they are powerful now or gaining power. But harami-panti to hai zehen mein, sab insan ke. Internal slave morality. How do we break through that shell as a society? As a society, तो हर आदमी का जो favorite topic है वो तो सब कोई बोलते फिरता है कि this should be mandatory in schools. So I even say Thomas Well should be mandatory in schools. Now I would like to say Nietzsche should be taught in schools. समझाएगा कौन? उसके लिए पहली बात तो एक गवर्नमेंट चाहिए होगा जो कि WEF के साथ उतना दोस्त नहीं है. उसके पहले ये सब नहीं होगा. I feel attacked. I almost think if I am doing the right thing. Barbarika is saying, and Bengal has decided to do the full slave making circuit from Islamist to Abrahamic to socialist to Islamic community. No wonder our backbone is jelly. That are you sure? WEF. Yeah. Google it. Thanks a lot for joining today's live stream, guys. It was a lot of fun. Max Weber turned out to be even more RSS Kadalla than we realized. Although RSS doesn't believe in the stuff he says, but it's a way of saying that he at times seems like the WhatsApp forwarding boomer Hindu uncle. Thanks for joining, guys. Good night.
যদি সবাই ফিরে যায় ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা সবাই ফিরে যায় যদি গহন পথে যাওয়ার কালে কেউ ফিরে না যায় তবে পথের কাটা তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে তুই রক্ত মাখা চরণ তলে একলা দলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে যদি আলো না ধরে ওরে ওরে ও ভাগা আলো না ধরে যদি ঝড় বাদলে আধার রাতে দুয়ার দেয় ঘরে তবে বজ্রানলে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে আপন বুকের পাঁজর জ্বালিয়ে নিয়ে একলা জলরে যদি তোর ডাক শুনে কেউ না আসে তবে একলা চলো রে একলা চলো একলা চলো একলা একলা চলো রে